Story 1. My sister with an imagined right wants my company, and my parents are threatening to disinherit me. I'm dealing with an absurd situation involving my family, specifically my parents and my younger sister, Emma. I'm not someone who usually airs their personal problems online, but I need some perspective because I feel like I'm losing my mind. To give you some context, I'm 30 years old and own a small graphic design company. This company is literally my baby. I started it from scratch when I was 22, after graduating, and I've worked day and night to make it successful. I didn't receive any financial support from anyone, not even my family, although at the time they told me I should prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. My sister Emma is 28 years old and, to put it nicely, has always been the princess of the house. Since we were kids, my parents have treated her as if she were the center of the universe. I, on the other hand, was always the independent one, the one who didn't need as much affection or attention because he always manages on his own. The worst part is that I grew up believing that was a compliment, until I realized it was actually just an excuse not to support me in the same way they did with Emma. Anyway, things had been relatively calm until a few weeks ago, when Emma found out that my company is having a good year. I just signed a major contract with a large client, and that has been a great achievement for me and my team. However, instead of congratulating me, Emma decided it was the perfect time to demand a share of my company. Yes, just as you read it. My sister wants me to give her 50% of my company as a gift. According to her, we are family, and everything I have I owe to my parents, so it's only fair that I share with her. She has no experience in design or business knowledge, and she didn't even show any interest in my work before this. But now, suddenly, she feels entitled to be my partner just because. At first, I thought it was a bad joke. I told her no, obviously, and tried to explain to her that it doesn't work that way. But instead of leaving it at that, she went crying to my parents and, as expected, now they are on her side too. According to them, I'm being selfish for not helping my sister and for not valuing everything they did for me by raising me. They even went so far as to say that if I don't agree, they are going to reconsider my place in their inheritance. That was like a bucket of cold water. I understand that my family has never been perfect, but this feels like a betrayal. I never asked them for anything to start my company, not even when things were difficult, and now that I'm finally reaping the fruits of my effort, it turns out that all of this is at risk because my sister feels she deserves it. I'm writing this because, honestly, I don't know how to handle the situation anymore. My girlfriend is furious and says I should cut off contact with everyone, but that's easier said than done. Despite everything, they are my family, and I don't want this to end up destroying the relationship. However, I also don't want to give in to the pressure and give away something that has taken me so much work to build. Update 1. I spoke with my parents after writing my initial post. My idea was to try to reason with them and explain that I can't just give away part of my company, especially to someone who has nothing to do with the business. I told them that, although I understand that they want the best for Emma, this is neither viable nor fair to me. But, as expected, the conversation didn't go well. My mother started crying, saying that I was acting selfishly, and my father hit me with one of those phrases that have haunted me all my life. Can't you make a small sacrifice for your family? At that moment, I didn't say anything. I just left because, honestly, I felt that anything I said was only going to make the situation worse. I thought that would be the end of it, but no. Emma, in her infinite wisdom, decided it was a good idea to quit her job. According to her, she did it because it no longer made sense to keep working if she was eventually going to have a position in my company. Of course, I didn't hear this directly from her, but because my parents called me furious. The conversation was surreal. My mother started by saying that Emma was very stressed and that now she had no income because I ruined her plans. My father accused me of being insensitive and told me that I am leaving my sister helpless. When I tried to defend myself by telling them that I never promised her anything, my mother replied with a phrase that I can't get out of my head, but she already took it for granted. What kind of brother disappoints her like that? Seriously? What am I supposed to do with that? Now it turns out that I am responsible for Emma's impulsive decisions. When I asked them how they thought she was going to support herself now, my father just told me, "That's something you should solve." As if that weren't enough, Emma sent me a long message, more like a 3-paragraph monologue, telling me that I am a bad brother, that I have always been self-centered, and that my success is due to the sacrifices of our family. According to her, she quit her job because of trust in me, and now I am leaving her stranded. I don't know what bothers me more, Emma's nerve or the fact that my parents are supporting her in all of this. My girlfriend is completely against me continuing to give them explanations. She told me something that gave me a lot to think about. You're not ruining Emma's life, but she and your parents are trying to ruin yours. For now, I am ignoring my family's messages and calls, but I have a bad feeling. I don't think this ends here. Update 2. I don't know how to explain the level of absurdity this situation has reached. Just a few weeks after the last incident, when I was already trying to get back to some normalcy in my life, my parents decided to take things to a new level. It all started when I received a call from my mother, who told me in a very cold tone, "We need to talk to you. We're going to your office tomorrow morning." Something in her voice put me on alert, but I had no idea what they were planning. When they arrived, they didn't come alone. They brought a lawyer with them, someone I know because he's a family friend. Right from the start, it seemed strange. They didn't even bother to hide it. They sat in front of me with an attitude that bordered on intimidating. The lawyer pulled out a folder with documents and, with a smile that I now see as condescending, explained that they wanted to draft a contract for Emma to officially become a partner in my company. I want you to understand the magnitude of this. My own parents brought a lawyer to my office to try to pressure me legally. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't an attempt to mediate or reach an agreement. It was an ambush. I was silent for a few seconds, processing what I had just heard. Finally, I asked them, trying to remain calm, "What makes you think you have any right to my company?" My mother sighed, as if I were being completely irrational. Then she said something that, honestly, stunned me. "Why did we raise you? We gave you everything you needed to get where you are today. That company wouldn't exist if it weren't for the values we instilled in you." That phrase hit me like a brick. For years they had repeated to me that I should stand on my own 2 feet, that I shouldn't expect help, that independence was the most important thing, and now, when they see me prosper, suddenly they want to claim my success as if it were something they built. The lawyer, clearly uncomfortable, tried to smooth things over by saying it was a gesture of family unity and that it could be beneficial for everyone if Emma joined the company. I asked him if he knew anything about graphic design, marketing, or even basic administration. Obviously, he didn't answer because the answer was obvious. Emma has no idea how my business works. My father, who had been silent until that moment, leaned towards me and said in a low but threatening voice, "If you don't do this, I promise you will regret it. There are ways to force you, and we are not going to stand idly by while you treat us like strangers." That was the last straw. I stood up, pointed to the door, and told them to get out of my office. I didn't even care about being rude. I was so furious I could barely think straight. I told them that if they tried anything legal, I would defend myself, but that I was not going to give in to their demands. When they left, I sat in my office trying to calm down, but the rage and sadness mixed in a way that was unbearable. How did we get to this point? How did they go from being my parents to being almost enemies? That same afternoon, I called a friend who is a lawyer specializing in commercial law. I explained the whole situation to him, and he advised me to start protecting my company more formally. I had already registered the company in my name, but he recommended adding additional clauses to prevent third parties, even family members, from making claims. He also suggested that I start documenting everything: emails, messages, any attempt at pressure or threats. For now, I'm on that. My friend is helping me strengthen the legal structure of my company, but I can't help but feel devastated. My parents are not only not on my side, but now seem determined to sabotage me. Emma, of course, is delighted. She posted something on her social media that was clearly aimed at me. Some people need to remember who was there for them from the beginning. Family should come first. It's exhausting. It's like I'm fighting against a wall. I feel like I'm no longer dealing with my family, but with some kind of organized enemy that will do whatever it takes to take something that belongs to me. And the worst part is that I have the feeling that this is just the beginning. Update 3. After the last time my parents came to my office with the lawyer, I decided to take a few days to reflect. I didn't answer their calls or Emma's messages, not even the passive-aggressive emails my mother started sending me, where she insisted that family is the only thing that matters in this world. However, this whole matter kept me awake at night. There was something that didn't add up. Emma had never shown any interest in my company until now. and my parents weren't usually so insistent when it came to family. Something else had to be going on. So, I talked to my cousin David, one of the few members of my family who isn't completely blinded by the favoritism towards Emma. I told him what was happening, hoping that maybe he had some perspective. To my surprise, after listening to me, he paused awkwardly and then said, "There's something you should know. It's not my place to tell you, but I think you should investigate your parents' finances." I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but it made me uneasy. When I pressed him a little more, he told me that he had heard rumors that my parents were going through serious financial problems. Supposedly, they invested a good amount of money in a friend's business that ended up being a complete disaster. Apparently, they now have debts they don't know how to handle. That conversation opened my eyes. Everything started to make sense. My parents, almost desperate, insistence, Emma's sudden decision to want to be a partner in my company, and even the fact that they brought a lawyer. All of this had nothing to do with the success of my company or with family. It was about money. I decided to confront my parents directly. I knew they weren't going to tell me the truth easily, so I went prepared. I arrived at their house, and, after the forced greetings, I asked them the question point blank. "How much money do you owe?" My mother's face went white as a sheet. My father tried to maintain his composure, but it was obvious that they didn't expect that question. They tried to deny it, saying that I was imagining things and that I didn't know what I was talking about. But when I mentioned the failed business David had told me about, the truth came out. It turns out that my parents are not only in debt, but they are on the verge of losing their house. They tried a couple of risky investments with the savings they had for their retirement, and everything went down the drain. Now they have accumulated debts, unpayable interest, and practically no source of income to get by. Worst of all, Emma was aware of all this from the beginning. She knew that my parents were desperate, and instead of looking for reasonable solutions, she decided to use her right of being the favorite to try to save the situation at my expense. When I confronted them about this, my mother started to cry, saying that they didn't know what else to do and that they thought that at least I would help because I am their son. My father, on the other hand, was much more direct. "You have the money and the success. It's the least you can do for us after everything we sacrificed for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to explain to them, once again, that my company is not a money machine that can solve all their problems, and that if they had asked me for help directly, instead of trying to manipulate me, maybe I would have considered doing something. But my father lost his patience and yelled at me. "The only thing we care about is that you solve this. We are not going to stand by and watch our lives be destroyed because you are too proud to share what you have." I left their house angrier and more disappointed than ever. That same night, Emma sent me a message full of reproaches, saying that I am a selfish person with a superiority complex, and that I should remember who was there for you when you were a nobody. Who was there for me, seriously? The same people who didn't support me with even a phone call when I was working 16 hours a day to keep my business afloat? From now on, I have no doubts. I can't trust them. As much as it hurts, I know I have to protect myself. My lawyer is already aware of this new information, and he suggested that, in addition to strengthening the legal protection of my company, I begin to disassociate myself from anything that could connect me financially with my parents. This situation is breaking me emotionally, but I'm clear about one thing. I'm not going to let them destroy everything I've built just because they made bad decisions. Update 4. My sister Emma literally tried to access my bank account. At this point, I feel like I'm living in some absurd soap opera, but sadly, this is my real life. It all started a few days ago when I received a security alert from my bank. It was a notification saying that someone had tried to access my account from an unrecognized device. I thought it could be a mistake, but when I opened the email and checked the IP address of the access attempt, I recognized something familiar. It matched the area where my parents live. At first, I didn't want to think the worst. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe someone else in the same area was trying something. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Why would some stranger try to hack me right now, in the middle of all this family madness? Something wasn't right. I called the bank to confirm the details of the access attempt. I explained the situation to them, and they were very understanding. They told me that someone had tried to reset my password using my email, but they hadn't been able to complete the process because they didn't have access to the security code sent to my mobile phone. This confirmed my suspicions. It wasn't a random attempt. It was someone who knew things about me and who intended to get into my accounts. This is where it all gets worse. I decided to investigate further and check my emails. I found that, a few days before the hacking attempt, someone had sent a request to change the password for my personal email. Fortunately, the request was blocked because I have two-step authentication. But that made my hair stand on end. Clearly, whoever was behind this knew that my email was the key to accessing everything else. The straw that broke the camel's back was a message that Emma sent me shortly after all of this. It said something like, "If you're not willing to share what you have, maybe it's time someone taught you a lesson about what family means." At that moment, everything clicked. It had to be Emma. Of course, I didn't have definitive proof yet, but the coincidence of everything was too strong. I decided not to answer her directly. Instead, I called my lawyer and told him what had happened. He recommended that I file a report immediately, even though I still didn't have solid proof that Emma was behind the hacking attempt. According to him, these types of situations can escalate quickly if preventative measures aren't taken. So that's what I did. I went to the police and explained what happened. I took screenshots of the emails, the activity log from my bank, and, of course, the message Emma sent me, which, although not a direct confession, does show that she is trying to intimidate me. I filed the report, and now I'm waiting for the authorities to investigate. The next day, I received a furious call from my mother. I have no idea how she found out about the report. Maybe Emma herself told her. But she was beside herself. She yelled at me, saying I was a traitor and that you can't treat your own blood as if she were a criminal. When I replied that Emma had tried to hack me, my mother flatly denied it and accused me of making excuses for not helping the family. The most surreal thing was that, instead of asking if I was okay or trying to understand my side of the story, my mother again insisted that all this would be solved if you just did the right thing and shared with your sister. After that call, it was clear to me that I could no longer maintain any kind of contact with them. My girlfriend convinced me to block them all temporarily, and although at first I felt guilty, now I see that it was necessary for my mental health. As part of the precautions, I reinforced security on all my accounts, both personal and business. I changed passwords, added biometric authentication, and set up alerts for any suspicious activity. I also asked my IT team at the company to check if there had been any strange access attempts on the systems. But fortunately, everything was clean. I'm furious and exhausted. I don't know what hurts me more, that my own sister has gone this far, or that my parents continue to defend her as if she hadn't done anything wrong. This is no longer just a family dispute. Now it feels like a direct attack against my stability, my work, and my peace of mind. The only thing I know for sure is that I'm not going to let them destroy me. I've already spoken to my lawyer about the possibility of requesting a restraining order against Emma if this happens again. As much as it hurts me, it seems that this is the path they are forcing me down. Final update. After the hacking attempt and the report I filed, I decided I couldn't just sit around and wait to see what Emma and my parents would do next. It was clear that this wasn't going to stop until they faced real consequences. I couldn't continue to be the target of their manipulation and dirty tactics. Days after the report, I received a call from the police. They told me they had traced the IP address of the hacking attempt, and, indeed, it matched my parents' house. It was a moment of relief, but also of deep sadness. It was confirmation that my own family was behind all of this. My lawyer explained that although the hacking attempts were unsuccessful, they were still a crime. Furthermore, the fact that Emma had tried to manipulate the situation with emotional threats and unauthorized access to my banking information put her in a very compromised position. We decided to proceed with a formal lawsuit, both against Emma and against any other member of my family who was involved. When my parents found out, it was as if everything exploded. My mother called me in tears, begging me to withdraw the complaint. She said that Emma didn't know what she was doing, that she was desperate, and that all of this could be fixed as a family. My father, on the other hand, sent me a direct message. If you go through with this, forget about us. You will no longer have a family. As much as those words hurt me, I couldn't go back. I had spent months enduring their manipulations, and the line had been crossed long ago. I wasn't going to allow them to continue using me as their solution for everything, especially when they no longer cared about sinking me if it meant getting what they wanted. The situation reached its most tense point when the police summoned Emma to testify. According to what they told me, She tried to deny everything at first, but finally admitted that it was she who tried to access my bank account. She justified it by saying that I didn't leave her any other option and that she did everything for the good of the family. That statement was key because it not only implied that she was guilty, but also showed that her actions were premeditated. The legal process moved quickly. My lawyer made sure that Emma faced charges for attempted fraud and unauthorized access to computer systems. Although she did not manage to complete the hack, the evidence was sufficient to present a solid case. On the other hand, my parents were also cited as accomplices, since the evidence showed that the hacking attempt was made from their house, and there were indications that they knew what Emma was planning to do. My family's reaction was, as always, to try to blame me. My mother accused me of being ruthless, heartless, and of destroying our family. My father even tried to justify Emma's actions by saying that she was just trying to get what belonged to her. Those words were the final confirmation that I could no longer consider these people my family. The case ended in a judicial agreement. Emma accepted a deal to avoid going to prison, but she had to plead guilty, pay a significant fine, and commit to attending mandatory therapy sessions for her behavior. My parents, on the other hand, had to sign an agreement not to approach my company or try to contact me directly. They were also obliged to pay a portion of the legal costs that this process generated for me. Although the outcome was favorable for me, I can't say that I came out of this unscathed. Losing my family, even under these circumstances, is something I never thought would happen. But there was no other option. I realized that, as much as I loved them, they didn't love me in the same way. They only saw what they could get from me, and when they didn't get what they wanted, they didn't hesitate to destroy me. Since then, I have cut off all contact with them. I changed my number, further strengthened the security of my company, and focused on surrounding myself with people who truly support me. My girlfriend, my friends, and even my colleagues have been a fundamental pillar in overcoming this. You know what's most ironic? Since all this ended, my company has grown more than ever. It's as if by freeing myself from that emotional burden and that toxicity, I could finally dedicate all my energy to what really matters. For the first time in months, I feel like I'm getting my life back. This is not what I wanted for my family. I always imagined that if I was successful one day, I could share it with them in a healthy and happy way. But there is a big difference between helping and being exploited. I learned that lesson the hard way, but now I know that, as much as it hurts, sometimes you have to set boundaries, even with the people you love. Story 2. My sister secretly married my ex-girlfriend, and now she wants me to attend their wedding. This is something I never thought I'd write, but honestly, I feel like I'm on the verge of an emotional breakdown, and I need to get this out. For years I thought I was a reasonably open-minded and open-hearted guy, but what just happened has me completely thrown. To give you some context, about 5 years ago, I dated a girl named Laura. Our relationship lasted almost 2 years, and it was, at the time, the most serious relationship I'd ever had. I always felt like we were building something stable. I truly loved her, and although we never seriously talked about marriage, I did imagine a future with her. But one day, completely out of the blue, she told me she needed to talk to me. At that moment, I thought it would be a normal conversation, maybe something related to problems in the relationship. Instead, she told me she'd been doing a lot of thinking and had come to the conclusion that she wasn't attracted to men. In her exact words, "I don't think I've ever liked men, and I need to explore that part of myself." Obviously, I was devastated. Not because she was gay, but because I felt completely disconnected from something so important in her life. Suddenly, our relationship wasn't just over, but I realized that it probably never meant the same thing to her as it did to me. After that, we cut off contact. I needed to heal, and frankly, I didn't want to be an obstacle in her process of self-discovery. It was difficult, but over time, I got over it. I thought it was all in the past. And then, years later, my sister, whom I'll call Sophia, comes to me with big news. She's getting married. I was thrilled for her because we're really close, and I've always wanted to see her happy. But what I didn't expect was for her to tell me that her fiancé was none other than Laura. As if that weren't enough, they weren't just engaged, they had already been secretly married for a year. You know what the worst part is? Nobody told me. My sister, my ex-girlfriend, my parents, everyone knew except me. Now Sophia wants me to attend their official celebration, as if it weren't an emotionally charged event for me. I feel confused, betrayed, and frankly, very lost. Am I being selfish for feeling this way? Part of me wants to be the understanding brother who celebrates Sophia's happiness, but another part can't stop wondering how someone who supposedly loves me could do this to me. Update 1. After spending a whole day mulling things over, I decided the best thing to do was talk to Sophia directly. I didn't want this to become a bigger conflict than necessary, but I couldn't continue with the uncertainty eating away at me. So I called her and asked to meet in person. When we sat down to talk, I got straight to the point. How long have you been with Laura? I told her I needed honesty because, honestly, the secrecy had hurt more than the relationship itself. She sighed, the kind of sigh you know comes with a long confession, and told me they had been together for almost 4 years. 4 years. That means they started their relationship roughly a year after Laura and I broke up. According to Sophia, at first it was just a friendship that developed into something more. But when they realized they were in love, they decided to keep it a secret. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, feeling my voice tremble. I didn't know if I was more upset or more hurt. Sophia looked at me with sincere eyes and said, because I didn't know how you were going to react. I didn't want to ruin our relationship, and Laura didn't want to hurt you either. We decided to wait until things felt more secure, but time passed, and we never found the right moment. Although I understand, in theory, why they acted that way, it also left a bitter taste in my mouth. If they really wanted to protect me, wouldn't it have been better to be honest from the beginning? The betrayal doesn't come from them being together, but from having been left out of something so important for so long. When I mentioned the secret wedding, she got defensive. She told me it wasn't a big ceremony or something meant to exclude me, but a signing at the civil registry to legally secure their relationship. She told me their real wedding would be this official celebration where they expected me to be present. After talking to Sophia, I felt like something wasn't quite right. Yes, she explained the reasons why they kept everything a secret, but I couldn't stop thinking that my own family also knew about this, and yet no one told me anything. I decided to talk to my parents to understand what the hell was going on. And, being honest, I needed to know if they were also behind this secret wedding. I went to their house that weekend and asked them point blank, how long have you known about Sophia and Laura? And more importantly, did you know they're already married? My mom looked down, clearly uncomfortable, while my dad sighed as if he'd been expecting this moment. He was the one who spoke first. Yes, we know. They were together for a long time before they got married. We didn't want to interfere. It was something they needed to handle in their own way. And the wedding? Did you know about that too? My mom chimed in. Well, yes. They asked us to be there the day they signed at the civil registry. It was a very small thing, just us. You weren't in town at the time. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I couldn't believe it. My own parents attended my sister's wedding to my ex-girlfriend, knowing the whole context, and they didn't even bother to mention it to me. Why didn't anyone tell me anything? I'm their brother. Don't you think I had the right to know? My dad tried to justify himself. We didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. We thought that since you'd broken up with Laura a long time ago, it wouldn't be that important to you. Wouldn't be that important to me? My ex-girlfriend, the person I thought I'd spend my life with at one point, is now my sister-in-law, and they assumed I wouldn't care? My mom tried to calm me down, saying she understood this was difficult to process, but that the time that had passed since my relationship with Laura should have been enough for it not to affect me so much. Honestly, that made me even angrier. How could they decide for me how I should feel about something like this? That conversation ended with much less drama than I was feeling inside. I told them I needed time to think, and that for now I preferred not to talk about it anymore. They respected that, but I know they feel like they didn't do anything wrong. I left their house with a mix of emotions I can't even begin to describe. On one hand, I felt like a stranger in my own family, like my feelings didn't matter. On the other hand, I couldn't stop thinking that maybe, somehow, they were right. Should I already be in an emotional place where this doesn't affect me so much? I don't have any answers right now. Just more questions and a feeling of isolation. I'm starting to think this wedding isn't just about Laura and Sophia. It's about how my family sees me and what role I really play in their lives. Update 2. After talking to Sophia and my parents, I knew the only way to get some clarity was to talk directly to Laura. I had been avoiding it because, honestly, I didn't know how I was going to react to seeing her. It's been years since we broke up, but this new context made it feel like it all happened yesterday. I sent her a short message. Laura, we need to talk. Can we meet this week? She replied after a few hours saying she understood and agreed. So we agreed to meet at a cafe. The day arrived, and to be honest, I felt ridiculously nervous. When I saw her, I realized she had changed a lot. She seemed calmer, more self-assured, and that made me feel, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe jealous, maybe nostalgic. I sat down across from her, and after an awkward exchange of hello and how have you been, I got straight to the point. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep this a secret for so long? Laura seemed prepared for the question. She took a sip of her coffee, took a deep breath, and said, I want you to know that it was never my intention to hurt you. When Sophia and I started dating, it was something we didn't even plan. It just happened. At first, I thought it was a fling, but then I realized I was in love with her. And to be honest, I was afraid of how you were going to react. Afraid of what? Of me finding out my sister was dating my ex, and that nobody had the decency to tell me. No, she responded calmly. Afraid that you would think this was an attack against you, when it wasn't. I know our relationship didn't end in the best way, and I know I hurt you when I broke up with you. But what I have with Sophia is different. She made me understand who I really am. What you and I had was important to me, but with her, it's different. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Different. Important, but different. I felt like she was minimizing what we shared in the past, but at the same time, I couldn't help but notice that she was speaking from a genuine place. And why get married in secret? Why do all this behind my back? Laura sighed and seemed truly remorseful. That was more Sophia's doing than mine. She was afraid you would feel betrayed and that it would affect your relationship with her. I agreed because I thought it was for the best, but now I realize it was a mistake. You deserve to know, and I'm truly sorry for not telling you sooner. The conversation ended with her apologizing, but I didn't feel like it really eased the weight I was carrying. The idea that Laura was in love with my sister while I was still healing from the breakup was hard to digest. At the same time, something in me began to accept reality. She wasn't the same person I knew years ago. She and I weren't the same people who shared that relationship. Maybe it was time to let the past go. But for now, I don't know if I'm ready for that. I left that cafe with mixed feelings. On one hand, I appreciated her honesty, but on the other, I still didn't know how to reconcile what I feel with what they are building together. I feel like I'm in emotional limbo, where I can't stop thinking about everything that happened, but I can't find a solution that makes me feel good. However, the pause didn't last long because Sophia decided to take the next step. Update 3. After the fight with Sophia, I felt more isolated than ever. My sister was mad at me. Laura seemed to have closed the chapter with an apology, and my parents continued to act as if I was the problem for not accepting the situation. Not a day passed after the call with Sophia when my mom texted me. Can you come to dinner? We need to talk. She didn't specify what about, but it was obvious. Something in me didn't want to go. I was tired of feeling attacked, or like I was the only one who was wrong. But I also knew that if I didn't go, the silence would only make things worse. I arrived home that night, and the atmosphere was tenser than usual. My dad was in the living room watching the news, but as soon as he saw me, he turned off the TV and went into the kitchen, where my mom was preparing something. It was she who broke the ice when we finally sat down at the table. Your sister is very hurt by you, she began bluntly. I sighed, tired. And what about how I feel? It seems like nobody cares what I'm going through. Everyone is focused on protecting Sophia and Laura, but who is worried about me in all of this? My mom looked at me with a mixture of sadness and firmness. Son, I understand that this has affected you, but sometimes you have to look beyond your own feelings. Your sister has found love, and as much as the situation might make you uncomfortable, that doesn't change the fact that what she's doing has nothing to do with trying to hurt you. Has nothing to do with me? For God's sake, Mom. My sister married my ex-girlfriend, and you knew all along. I don't understand how you expect me to just accept it as if nothing happened. Because we're family, my dad replied, who until then had been silent. And in a family, sometimes you have to swallow your pride to support the ones you love. That phrase struck a nerve. Swallow my pride. This isn't pride, Dad, it's feeling betrayed. Laura isn't just any ex. She was someone I thought I'd spend my life with. And now, after everything that's happened, I have to see her with my sister and pretend it means nothing to me. There was an uncomfortable silence. My mom finally said something I didn't expect. We know this is difficult for you, but have you ever put yourself in Sophia's shoes? For years, she felt she had to hide something so important from you because she was afraid of how you were going to react. That wasn't easy for her. That made me think. Although it didn't justify what they had done, for the first time I tried to imagine what it must have been like for Sophia. It must have been a huge dilemma to fall in love with someone I had shared a past with, and they probably went through thousands of scenarios in their heads where this would end badly. Despite that, I still felt I deserved more consideration from her. I told them so. I understand this wasn't easy for Sophia, but that doesn't mean I should carry all of this alone. If we're family, like you say, then she should have also thought about how this would affect me. My mom nodded as if she finally understood my point, but didn't say anything else. Dinner ended without any major confrontations, but I left their house feeling that even though perhaps some of my perspective had been heard, it wasn't going to change the situation. Update 4. After a few days, I realized something important. No matter how much I try to explain myself, none of them really understand how I feel. They're so focused on protecting Sophia and Laura's happiness that they've overlooked what this means for me. I spent days reflecting. I would wake up thinking about the wedding, what it meant to attend, and what it meant not to. On one hand, I knew my absence would make a strong statement. Deep down, I worried that this would fracture my relationship with Sophia. But, on the other hand, I felt that attending would be betraying myself. So I made a decision. I'm not going. I know it sounds definitive, but it wasn't an easy decision. It was the result of many sleepless nights going over the same questions again and again. In the end, I came to the conclusion that I can't put others above my own mental and emotional health. This wedding isn't just an event. It's a constant reminder of how my feelings were ignored and minimized by the people who should be supporting me the most. The next thing was to communicate my decision. I decided to talk to Sophia first. Although we had ended our last conversation badly, I knew I owed her at least the courtesy of explaining my position before she found out from someone else. I called her and got straight to the point. Sophia, I want you to know that I'm not going to attend your wedding. This doesn't mean I don't love you or that I don't wish you happiness, but I can't be there. I just can't. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so long that I thought she had hung up. But finally, she responded in a voice that was neither angry nor sad, just tired. I knew this was going to happen from the beginning. I knew you weren't going to be able to handle it. But you know what? It's okay. Do what you have to do. I wanted to say something else, but I felt there was nothing I could do to fix the space that had opened up between us. I wished her the best and hung up. I stared at my phone for a while, feeling like I had just closed an important chapter of my life. Then I talked to my parents. I explained my decision, trying to make it not sound like an accusation, but also not softening my feelings. My mom tried to convince me one last time. Son, please think this through. This isn't something Sophia is going to forgive easily, but I had already made my decision. I know Sophia may never understand, but if I go, I'll be lying, and I don't want to start building a relationship with her based on a lie. My dad, to my surprise, patted me on the shoulder and said, "Do what you have to do, son. It's not easy being in your shoes, and nobody should force you to do something that makes you feel this way." It was a rare moment of support in the midst of all the chaos, but I appreciated it more than I can explain. At this point, I'm trying to focus on what I can control. I know my decision will have consequences, but I believe I've chosen the path that is truest to myself. Maybe Sophia will never understand, but I hope someday she can forgive me. Update 5. I knew my decision not to attend the wedding was going to cause problems, but I wasn't prepared for the magnitude of the reaction. Just 2 days after my conversation with Sophia, I received a long message full of anger and reproaches. It was from my sister. It began with a cold. "I thought you were better than this." I read it with my heart racing, and every word felt like a blow. "I always believed you could be an adult about this, but it's clear you're only thinking about yourself. This wedding isn't about you. It's about me and Laura. You've decided to become the victim and push us all away. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this. Maybe I shouldn't even try." The message ended with a definitive, "Do what you want with your life, but don't expect to be a part of mine anymore." It was devastating to read. Sophia and I had always been close, and seeing her so furious with me made me question if I was making the right decision. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't go against what I felt. Things didn't end there. My parents, who until then had tried to be neutral, quickly changed their stance. My mom called me the next day, clearly upset. "How can you do this to your sister? This is one of the most important occasions of her life, and you decide not to be there. What kind of message do you think you're sending to her and Laura? I tried to explain again that it wasn't a decision made lightly, that I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but it was no use. My mom wasn't willing to listen this time. We've always supported you in everything, and now that your sister needs your support, you decide to turn your back on her. I'm disappointed in you, and I don't know how we're going to get past this as a family. My dad, who at first seemed to understand my perspective, also quickly sided with Sophia. During another call, he said something that really hurt me. Maybe you're letting pride get the better of you. We all have to deal with uncomfortable things in our lives, but family comes above that. I don't know what happened to you in the end. It seemed like my whole family had decided that I was the villain in this story. No one was willing to consider my pain or what it meant for me to face this situation. Since then, I've kept my distance. I didn't go to the wedding. I didn't want to ask how it was, although I saw some pictures on social media posted by family and friends. They looked happy. Everyone looked happy, except me. I haven't spoken to Sophia since her last message. My parents keep calling me, but our conversations are short and tense. It's like every call has a subtext. When are you going to apologize? But I don't feel like I should. I don't know if I made the best decision, but I made the one I needed to move on with my life. I've started dedicating myself more to my work, my friends, and trying to find some peace within all of this. It's not easy, but I'm learning to let go. Sometimes I wonder if my family will ever understand my perspective. Maybe not. Maybe this is the price of being honest with myself. For now, I keep moving forward, trying to find my place in a world where, for the first time, I feel like I'm alone. Story 3. My ex-father-in-law took everything from me, but his business failed, and now he wants my support. I don't even know where to begin because this situation seems like something out of a bad soap opera, the kind you watch on TV when there's nothing better to do. A few years ago, I thought my life was settled. I was in a serious relationship with Sarah, my girlfriend at the time, and I honestly believed she was the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. We met at university, and, typically, we fell in love, made plans, and dreamed of a future together. What I didn't see coming, and how I regret not seeing it, was the chaos that would ensue from being close to her family, specifically her father, Don Ernesto. To give you an idea, Don Ernesto was a successful businessman, at least outwardly, and from the beginning, he made me feel like part of his world. When we got engaged, he offered me a job at his family business. It was a decent position, with good pay and prospects. At first, I felt fortunate because you don't get offered an opportunity like that every day, but things started to change. Don Ernesto had a rather intimidating way about him. I don't know if it was his management style or simply his personality, but he always gave the impression that if you didn't do things his way, you were out. I wanted him to like me. I wanted to show him that I was capable, that I wasn't with his daughter for her money. So, I worked hard, very hard. Everything seemed to be going well until he asked me to sign some documents. He told me it was for efficiency, that the project we were managing required some legal adjustments, and I, idiot, trusted him. I didn't even stop to read them carefully. Who questions their future father-in-law? Spoiler alert. Those documents were a trap. I discovered this shortly after, when my relationship with Sarah began to fall apart. Yes, it turns out that the love of my life wasn't as perfect as I thought. I discovered she was cheating on me, but the worst part wasn't just that. When we broke up, her father took advantage of the situation to destroy me. Suddenly, everything I had worked for at the company disappeared. Ernesto used those damn documents I signed to saddle me with financial responsibilities I didn't even understand. He took my car, the money I had saved, and even the furniture I had bought when Sarah and I lived together. It was as if everything was ripped away from me in one fell swoop. I tried to defend myself, but he was powerful. He had lawyers, contacts, and I was just a regular guy who trusted the wrong people. To make matters worse, Sarah started spreading rumors about me, that I was the toxic one, that I was ungrateful to her family, that I wasn't good enough for her. I lost friends, connections, and, for a while, the hope of getting back on my feet. Fast forward 3 years. Yes, 3 long years. I had to start from scratch. It wasn't easy, but I managed to get ahead. I learned to take care of myself and not trust so blindly. And just when I thought that chapter of my life was closed, Ernesto reappears. This time, not with his superior attitude, but with a plea. His business is in ruins, his partners abandoned him, and now, for some reason I still don't understand, he thinks I'm the right person to help him. He called me, and although my first instinct was to laugh, I can't deny that something inside me stirred. Who does this? Who ruins your life and then shows up begging for help? Update 1. It's been 3 days since I posted this, and I honestly didn't expect anything else to happen so fast. But of course, because when you have someone like Don Ernesto in your life, the drama never seems to end. The guy called me. Yes, he called me directly. I don't even know how he got my number because I changed it after everything that happened with Sarah and her family. But there it was, his name on the screen. And although everything in me said, don't answer, leave it unseen, and move on with your life, I did. I guess part of me wanted to hear him grovel, or at least understand how bad the situation was that he had to swallow his pride. The conversation was uncomfortable. His tone was completely different from what I remembered. Don Ernesto always had a way of speaking that made you feel like he was above you, and you were below, but this time he sounded humble, even nervous. After the forced pleasantries, he dropped the bomb. I know it's probably not the best time, but I need your help. There was an awkward silence because, frankly, what are you supposed to say to that? I just managed to say, help with what, exactly? That's when he began to tell me that his business was in the red. According to him, the company had faced several problems since I left. Sorry, he practically fired me. He said he had made hasty decisions, that the partners hadn't lived up to expectations, blah, blah, blah. In short, he wanted me to come back and advise him because, in his words, you were always the only one who understood my vision. And here comes the part that freaked me out the most. Before hanging up, he said something that left my head spinning. I know I made mistakes with you, but there are things that you don't know. What things? I tried to ask him, but he quickly changed the subject and ended the call saying he hoped I would consider it and think about it. When I hung up, I felt confused and, to be honest, a little annoyed. What the hell does he want now? Why is he looking for me, out of all people, when he has contacts, resources, and a history of stepping on those who are no longer useful to him? I can't get what he said out of my head. What did he mean by things you don't know? Part of me thinks he was just playing with my curiosity, but another part, the one that hasn't completely gotten over what he did to me, wants answers. I knew Don Ernesto's call wasn't going to be the end of it, but what I definitely didn't expect was for Sarah to reappear in my life as well. Because, of course, this wouldn't be a complete disaster if my ex wasn't involved, right? It all started with a text message. It was from an unknown number and said something like, "Hi, I know we don't have the best relationship, but I think we should talk. It's important. Sarah." First, I laughed, then I got angry, then I stared at the message for a while, because what could she possibly want now? I spent days trying to forget what she did to me, how she left me hanging while her father stripped me of everything, and now she shows up wanting to talk. At first, I thought about ignoring her, but, as always, my curiosity won. I agreed to see her. We met at an outdoor cafe because, honestly, I didn't want a place where I could feel trapped. When she arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. I don't know if it was the weight of time or stress, but she wasn't the same Sarah I remembered. Even her way of speaking had changed. She sounded more insecure. After the awkward greetings, she got straight to the point. She told me that her family was going through total chaos, that the company was almost bankrupt, that some of her dad's partners had left, taking more money than they should have, and that her childhood home was mortgaged. All of this sounded like karma to me, but what really shocked me was what she said next. My dad needs you more than you can imagine, and not just for the business. I asked her to explain, but it was obvious she didn't want to give me all the details at once. Instead, she changed the subject and started talking about how her dad had always respected me more than he wanted to admit. I struggled not to laugh in her face. Respect? Really? This is the same man who manipulated documents to saddle me with a debt that wasn't mine? That's when Sarah dropped the bomb. He inflated those debts on purpose. He wanted you tied to the business, so you wouldn't have any choice but to stay. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I knew something was wrong with those contracts, but hearing her admit it was like reliving all the pain and frustration of those years. I asked her why the hell she was telling me this now, and her answer was as confusing as it was revealing. Because I think he regrets it, and because he needs someone to help him. If he doesn't, everything he's built will be lost. He regrets it? Does he expect me to care? I remained silent, trying to process what I had just heard. Before leaving, Sarah looked at me with something that resembled guilt, or maybe it was just another attempt at manipulation, and said, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but think about it. Not for him, but because you were also a part of this at one point. I don't know what to think. I'm angry, confused, and, I admit, a little tempted to know more. Something in me feels that this story still has buried things that I don't fully understand. Update 2. It's been a couple of weeks since my meeting with Sarah. After that conversation, I decided to take some time to process everything. I ignored Ernesto's calls and Sarah's messages because, honestly, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to leave it all behind, but another part couldn't stop thinking about those words. There are things you don't know. If he inflated those debts on purpose. I'm not going to lie, my curiosity was killing me. So, after thinking about it too much, and after Ernesto's incessant calls and emails, I agreed to meet with him. Not because I wanted to help him, but because I felt I deserved answers. We met at his office, which, to my surprise, was completely desolate. It wasn't even a shadow of what I remembered. The walls were bare, the desks abandoned, and even the lights seemed dimmer. Ernesto greeted me with a nervous smile, a far cry from the arrogant man he used to be. He looked tired, even defeated. After a couple of minutes of small talk, because apparently he still has to feign politeness, he got straight to the point. He told me the company was on the verge of bankruptcy and that he had tried everything possible to save it, but nothing worked. According to him, he had lost the trust of his partners and the banks no longer wanted to finance him. Basically, he was against the wall. "I need you to get out of this," he said, looking at me as if he were offering me a golden opportunity. I almost laughed in his face. Me? The guy you ruined? But I held back because I wanted to know more. I asked him why he thought I would help him after everything he had done to me. And that's when he dropped something that chilled me to the bone. "I know I made mistakes with you, but I want to make it up to you. There's something I discovered about those papers you signed. We can cancel that debt." I stared at him, trying to read between the lines. Cancel the debt? After years of bearing the consequences of his manipulation, I asked him to be clearer, and he confessed that there were legal irregularities in the contracts. In other words, he knew from the beginning that the documents were a mess, but now he was willing to use that as a bargaining chip. "If you help me, I'll make all of that disappear. We could even review if there's anything you can recover." And here's the best part. He also offered me a percentage of the shares if I agreed to come into the company to restructure it. This wasn't just a desperate plea anymore. It was a play. Don Ernesto hadn't changed. He was still a strategist, a manipulator, trying to use anything to get ahead. But, at the same time, it made me think, how bad did things have to be for him to swallow his pride and offer me a part of the business? I told him I needed time to think about it. Not because I wanted to help him, but because I was beginning to see that this could be an opportunity to understand everything that really happened during those years and maybe even recover some of what he took from me. Either way, I felt strange leaving that office. It was as if I had seen a wounded lion trying to convince me that it still had teeth. Now I have many questions. How real are those irregularities in the documents? And what is Ernesto hiding? Something tells me he hasn't told me everything. I'm going to talk to a lawyer before making any decisions. I don't want to fall into another one of his traps, but at the same time, I can't stop thinking that maybe this is my chance to turn everything around. Update 3. A week has passed since my meeting with Don Ernesto. During that time, I followed my gut and looked for a lawyer, someone who could review those documents I signed years ago. It took me a while to dust off the papers, not just because they were physically in boxes stored in a forgotten corner of my apartment, but because emotionally, it was like opening old wounds. Luckily, I found someone recommended by a friend, a lawyer specializing in corporate contracts. Let's call him Luis. When I explained my situation, his initial reaction was a mix of surprise and indignation. I left him all the documents and asked him to tell me with brutal honesty if there was any way to use them to my advantage. A few days passed, and then I received a call from Luis to schedule a meeting. When I arrived, his expression said more than any words. He showed me the documents and pointed out several irregularities, clauses that were contradictory, signatures that looked duplicated, and best of all, certain provisions that were. "This is a disaster," he said, clearly astonished that I had signed something like that. "If you had taken this to court at the time, not only could you have voided everything, but you probably could have sued him for fraud." That last word hit me like a bucket of cold water. Fraud. I knew Ernesto had played dirty, but having a professional confirm it made me feel two things at the same time. Enormous rage for having been so naive and a small spark of hope. I asked him if I could still do anything after all this time, and although he didn't give me a definitive answer, he said there were possibilities. However, He made it clear to me that if I wanted to go down that road, it would be a long and costly battle. You have to decide if it's worth it, he told me, because from what I see, he's using this to manipulate you again. And here comes the interesting part. Luis also asked me a question I hadn't considered. Why do you think you are so important to saving his business? What are you missing? That question left me pondering everything because, honestly, it doesn't make sense that Ernesto wants me back, much less that he's willing to offer me shares and erase that debt. Something doesn't add up, and now I'm starting to think this goes beyond financial ruin. That same night, I received another message from Sarah. It was short but direct. My dad wants to see you again. He says he's ready to tell you everything. Please don't ignore him. I don't know if it was the desperate tone or the fact that I'm already in this up to my neck, but I accepted. I arranged to meet Ernesto at a discreet restaurant, and when I arrived, he was already waiting for me with a folder on the table. He didn't waste any time and started talking as soon as I sat down. He told me something that chilled me to the bone. When you signed those papers, it wasn't just to protect the business. There were other people involved, partners who didn't want you to have such a significant stake. It was a hasty decision, but now I know it was a mistake. I asked him directly if that meant I was used as a scapegoat to cover up some bigger debt or problem, and although he tried to beat around the bush, he admitted it. He said that, basically, they made me a kind of insurance policy to appease certain partners who didn't trust me. But here comes the darkest part. Those partners, according to Ernesto, are not only out of the company now, but were also responsible for part of the current collapse. And apparently, some of them want to get what's theirs back and are pressuring him to pay. At that moment, everything clicked. He's not asking for my help just to save his business. He's asking for my help because he thinks I can somehow deal with the problems he himself created. I don't know whether to feel more angry or impressed by his audacity. The only thing I know is that Ernesto isn't telling me the whole story, and Sarah, even though she seems to be on the side of truth, is probably hiding things as well. I decided that I couldn't just accept what he had told me halfway, so I started investigating. I took advantage of some contacts I still had from my time at the company, and after a couple of uncomfortable calls, I managed to get some information about who these problematic partners were. It turns out that Ernesto had 3 main investors at the time, all of them fairly well-known figures in the local business scene. But there was one man who stood out above the rest, Arturo Beltran. This guy is famous, but not for good reasons. He's known for having a shady history of failed businesses, lawsuits, and, according to rumors, connections to illegal activities. When I heard that name, everything made a little more sense. Arturo never trusted me when I worked with Ernesto. In fact, I remember that in more than one meeting, he would ask me aggressive questions, as if he were waiting for me to make a mistake. Now I understand why. I was an obstacle to him. What worried me most was learning that Arturo still has some influence in the business. Although he's no longer officially part of the company, according to my source, Arturo was pressuring Ernesto to settle a significant debt that was never fully paid off, and it seems that, in part, that was the reason why they inflated my contracts at the time. Basically, I was a pawn in a much bigger game. With this information, I decided to contact Luis again, my lawyer, and told him everything. His reaction was blunt. If Arturo is involved, you have to be very careful. This guy doesn't play fair, and if Ernesto is approaching you again, it could be to use your name or your reputation as a shield. That idea chilled me to the bone. Is it possible that Ernesto is planning something even worse? Luis recommended that I document everything, even my conversations with Sarah and Ernesto, in case this escalated further than it already had. And speaking of Sarah, here comes another interesting part. After a few days without hearing from her, she sent me another message, but this one was different. It was a photo of a document, a contract between Ernesto and Arturo, with my name mentioned in a clause that basically made me responsible for covering certain losses if things went wrong. This was the last straw. I called Sarah demanding an explanation, and what she told me was complicated. She confessed that she found that contract among her father's papers, and that she had kept it because she knew that if I saw it, I would realize that Ernesto's entire strategy had revolved around me from the beginning. According to her, Arturo had pressured her father to use me as a sort of financial cushion, knowing that I had no idea what I was really signing. I want to help you, Sarah said, almost pleading, but I need you to trust me. Not everything is as it seems. That last part gave me chills. I asked her directly if she was on her father's side or mine, and although she didn't answer immediately, she assured me that she wanted to do things right this time. But the worst came the next day. I received an anonymous call, and when I answered, a deep, slow voice said to me, "Stop poking your nose where it doesn't belong. This isn't your problem." It was brief, but the message was clear. Someone is watching me, and now I'm almost certain it's Arturo. I don't know how to react. On the one hand, I want to move forward with this because I feel I finally have a chance to uncover the whole truth and maybe recover what was taken from me. But on the other hand, I'm starting to wonder if I'm getting myself into something much more dangerous than I can handle. I'm considering hiring security, or at least being more careful with my movements, because if Arturo is really behind this, I don't think he'll just sit idly by. Update 4. After receiving that anonymous call, I was on high alert. I started noticing things I wouldn't normally have perceived. A car that seemed to be following me, messages without a sender in my mailbox, even the constant feeling of being watched. I'm not going to lie, I was paranoid. Luis, my lawyer, recommended that I take immediate action. "We need proof of everything that's happening," he said. "If this escalates, we're going to need something solid to back up your version of events." So, I installed cameras in my apartment and started keeping a detailed record of every interaction I had with Ernesto, Sarah, or anyone else involved. I also hired a private investigator, recommended by Luis, to delve deeper into Arturo's movements. I knew I couldn't confront him directly without understanding exactly what he was capable of. Meanwhile, Ernesto kept insisting on us meeting. It was almost exasperating, like a child who needs attention. Finally, I agreed to one last meeting, on the condition that everything he said would be recorded, obviously, without him knowing. We met in a small office he rented, because, as he explained, he'd had to close his old office to cut costs. When I arrived, Ernesto seemed more nervous than ever. Even his usual air of superiority had vanished. Before I could even sit down, he started talking. "Arturo found out I contacted you. It wasn't my intention to get you into trouble, but I need you to understand something. He doesn't just want money. He wants to make sure no one can bring him down." I asked him to get straight to the point. I wasn't in the mood for more beating around the bush. Then he showed me a document, a new contract that basically involved me as a financial mediator between the company and Arturo, with vague promises of settling my old debt and a percentage of shares in my name if I accepted. I laughed. I seriously laughed in his face. I asked him if he really expected me to sign something like that after everything that had happened. That's when his facade finally cracked. "This isn't just about me," he said, almost pleading. "He doesn't trust me anymore, but he thinks you can calm things down. If I don't sign this agreement, I'll lose everything, and if you don't sign it, he'll come after you anyway." At that moment, I understood what Ernesto was trying to do. He was trying to use me as his last line of defense. He not only wanted me to take the blame, but also to put myself on the front lines with Arturo. And although part of me wanted to yell at him to go to hell, I knew I needed to stay calm. I told him I wouldn't sign anything without reviewing it with my lawyer. That seemed to calm him down a bit, but something in his eyes told me he hadn't finished playing all his cards. On the other hand, my private investigator finally brought me concrete information about Arturo. It turns out he was dealing with legal problems due to shady business dealings in other cities. And although he couldn't confirm anything, it seemed like he was using the conflict with Ernesto as a way to generate quick cash to cover his own problems. The worst part is that Arturo had been investigating me, too. According to my investigator, he had tried to access records related to me and was apparently looking for something he could use as leverage. That would explain the anonymous call and the atmosphere of paranoia I'd been living in. That's when I made a decision. I had to confront him, but not on his terms. I started coordinating a legal strategy with Luis to protect myself and, at the same time, prepare a counterattack. I knew I couldn't take down Arturo directly, but if I played my cards right, I could dismantle his influence over Ernesto and, with any luck, recover some of what had been taken from me. All of this left me with a strange feeling. On the one hand, I felt like I was getting closer to the truth, but on the other, I knew I was playing with fire. And as if that weren't enough, I received a message from Sarah that same night. "Please don't do anything impulsive. There are things you don't know about my dad and Arturo. If you want answers, I need to see you one more time. I'm exhausted, physically and mentally. Every step I take seems to open a new layer of this disaster." And although I want to get out of all of this, I know I'm in too deep to back down now. Final update. This isn't what I expected to write. Everything has taken such a strange and tragic turn that I'm honestly still processing what happened. After my last conversation with Sarah, I was determined to meet with her and get answers, but that meeting never happened. It all started one morning when I received a call from an unknown number. It was a police officer. At first, I thought it had something to do with Arturo or the threats I had been receiving, but what they told me left me speechless. Ernesto had been found dead in his office. According to the officer, it was one of the employees who worked in the building who discovered the body. Apparently, Ernesto had stayed working late, alone, as had become his custom lately. They found him sitting in his chair, with a gunshot wound to the head and a gun in his hand. Everything pointed to suicide, but it wasn't long before questions started to arise. According to the police, there were too many details that didn't add up: the position of the gun, the fingerprints. There were even signs of a struggle in the office. It soon became clear that this hadn't been a suicide. Ernesto had been murdered. Rumors began to spread like wildfire, and all fingers pointed to one person, Arturo Beltran. The police didn't take long to find reasons to arrest him. His connections to Ernesto, his history of threats, and the recent disputes over the debt made him the prime suspect. They also found recent messages between Ernesto and Arturo that showed growing tension between them. Although there was no direct evidence, the case against Arturo seemed solid, at least on paper. When I learned of his arrest, I felt strange. Part of me was relieved that Arturo was out of the picture, but another part couldn't ignore the fact that this was too convenient. Would Arturo really be so careless as to leave such an obvious trail? Or was there someone else pulling the strings? Sarah, on the other hand, remained completely silent. She didn't answer my calls or messages, which wasn't usual for her. Finally, a week after Ernesto's death, she contacted me. We met at a cafe, and the first thing I noticed was how much she had changed. She seemed colder, more calculating. She told me that she was now the sole owner of the business. Ernesto hadn't left a will, but because of local laws and being the sole heir, everything belonged to her. "I'm going to take care of the company," she said in a tone I'd never heard from her before. "My dad messed up a lot of things, but I'm not going to let this end like this. There are no more debts with Arturo. Everything is under control." That last part chilled me to the bone. "What do you mean there are no more debts with Arturo?" I asked her to explain, but she avoided answering directly. The only thing she said was, "Things are no longer a problem for anyone. Trust me." When I asked her directly if she believed Arturo had ordered Ernesto's murder, her answer was even more disturbing. "Does it matter? The truth wouldn't change anything now." That phrase left me with more questions than answers. Something in her tone, in her look, made me feel like she knew much more than she was willing to tell me. Since then, everything has calmed down. Arturo remains in custody while the investigation is carried out, but so far they haven't found any conclusive evidence against him. Sarah, for her part, seems to have taken full control of the company and is raising it from the ashes. She even offered me a settlement to compensate for everything I lost, something I'm still considering. And I keep wondering what really happened that night in Ernesto's office. Was it Arturo, desperate for his money? Or was it someone else, someone who had as much to gain as to lose in all of this? The truth is, I'll never know the answer. Ernesto wasn't an easy man to love, but no one deserves to end up like that. And although everything seems to have come to an end, I can't help but feel that this story still has loose ends, that something or someone is still lurking in the shadows. Maybe I'll never know. Story 4. I discovered that my dad gave the family business to my sister's boyfriend, and he ran it into the ground. My family has a business that has been a part of our lives forever. My grandfather founded it over 50 years ago, and my dad took over after he retired. It's the typical business that, while it doesn't make us millionaires, has been our pride. My parents paid for our education with it, and it always felt like something that would pass from generation to generation. I grew up watching my dad work hard. Although he never directly told me he wanted me to take the reins, I always assumed I would. My sister and I were the only children, and she never showed much interest in the business. She always had other plans. So, I thought that eventually, the business would be my responsibility. But, a couple of years ago, things took an unexpected turn. My dad announced he was going to take a break, and that he wanted to delegate the daily operation of the business. Up to that point, everything was fine. But then he dropped the bomb. Instead of putting me in charge, or at least consulting me about the plan, he decided to appoint my sister's boyfriend, Luis, as manager. Luis, well, how do I put this? He's nice, but not exactly someone I would trust with a family business. He's one of those guys who seem very self-assured, but who have no substance behind it. He has never worked in the industry. He doesn't even have experience managing a team. When my dad gave me the news, I remember feeling like someone had dumped a bucket of cold water on me. I try not to make a big deal out of it because my dad was so excited about the idea. He said things like, Luis has fresh ideas, and we need someone with a different perspective. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to seem jealous or bitter. Besides, my sister seemed so happy with the decision that I thought, well, maybe it will work. Maybe I'm being too critical. Fast forward to today. The business, which had always been stable, is starting to show cracks. Clients who have worked with us for decades have stopped coming. Several key employees, those who have been there since before I was born, have left. My dad barely mentions the subject, but I can see he's worried. I recently went to the office, and the atmosphere was completely different. It was as if everyone was walking on eggshells. One of the employees who is still there, and who has worked with my family for years, told me that things are bad. Bad decisions, late payments, and that Luis doesn't seem to know what he's doing. I'm trying to stay calm, but I don't know what to do. I feel that if I speak up, it could cause a huge conflict with my sister. She's completely on Luis's side, and every time someone criticizes him, she takes it as a personal attack. On the other hand, I can't just stay silent and watch something my grandfather built with so much effort go to ruin. Update 1. I decided to take the first step and talk to my dad. It wasn't easy because my dad and I have never had a particularly open relationship. He's from that generation that prefers to solve problems alone and not talk too much about what he feels. When I was a child, he was always very affectionate, but on serious matters, he was always rather reserved. I knew that if I was going to bring up this subject, I had to do it very carefully. I spent days thinking about how to start the conversation. I wanted it to be respectful and, above all, avoid it seeming like an attack. My intention wasn't to turn against him or Luis, but I felt that if I didn't say something now, things would only get worse. Finally, one evening after dinner, I gathered my courage and asked him to talk. We sat in the living room, and from the beginning, I noticed that my dad was defensive. He crossed his arms and kept looking at his watch, as if he already knew what this was all about and wanted to finish quickly. I tried to stay calm and started by saying that I was worried about the business. I explained that I had been hearing comments from employees and clients suggesting that things weren't going well. I didn't mention names or specific rumors because I didn't want it to seem like I was gossiping, but I did make it clear that I was worried about the direction everything was taking. At first, my dad didn't say anything. He just looked at me with that expression he always makes when he's upset, but doesn't want to admit it. Finally, after a silence that felt eternal, he sighed and said, "Look, I knew you were going to react like this from the moment I made this decision. But you know what? We all need to learn. Luis is learning. Making mistakes is part of the process, and I made them too when I started." I didn't know how to respond to that. On the one hand, I understood what he meant. Of course, nobody is born knowing how to run a business. But this wasn't the time or place for someone to learn, not with lifelong clients and loyal employees at stake. I told him I understood his point, but I felt that Luis's mistakes were affecting the business too much. This is where the conversation started to become more tense. My dad denied several things I mentioned. For example, when I told him that some employees had quit because they didn't feel respected by Luis, my dad said, "That has nothing to do with him. People are always looking for better opportunities. It's normal." I tried to give him specific examples of things I had heard, like important clients who had complained about delays or problems with orders. My dad simply said things like, "That happens in all businesses," or "Luis just needs time to get organized." He even went so far as to say that some of those clients were too demanding, and that maybe they weren't as valuable as we thought. By this point, I realized I wasn't going to get very far. I felt like I was talking to a wall. My dad was convinced that Luis needed time, and that things would eventually improve. I left that conversation frustrated and with a feeling of helplessness I hadn't felt in a long time. That same night, as if the universe wanted to make things even more difficult for me, I received a message from a former employee who had worked with us for over 15 years. He was someone I respected a lot, and who had always been like part of the family. He wrote to tell me that he had quit because he couldn't stand working under Luis's command anymore. According to him, Luis was arrogant, didn't listen to anyone, and made impulsive decisions that affected both employees and clients. One of the things he told me left me particularly alarmed. Apparently, Luis had fired a long-time employee just because he had questioned him in a meeting. It wasn't anything rude or personal. He simply made an observation about how to handle a certain situation with a supplier, and Luis took it as a challenge to his authority. The next day, the guy was out. But that wasn't the worst part. This former employee also hinted that Luis had been using company money for personal expenses. He didn't have concrete proof, but he said there were rumors among the staff that Luis had bought a new car and paid for some luxury vacations with company funds. This put me on high alert. I thought about talking directly to Luis, but I knew that would probably lead nowhere. So I decided to talk to my sister, thinking that as Luis's partner, she might be able to help give him some perspective. Big mistake. From the moment I mentioned the subject, my sister got defensive. She told me I was being bitter and jealous, and that I had never supported Luis from the beginning. She tried to justify everything I mentioned. She said the employees who had left weren't loyal, that the clients who had complained were old-fashioned, and that Luis was just modernizing the business. I tried to stay calm, but when I mentioned the rumors about the mismanagement of money, she exploded. She accused me of making things up to discredit Luis and told me I was pathetic. The conversation ended with her yelling that she didn't want to talk about the business with me again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I feel like I'm watching everything my grandfather and dad built crumble before my eyes, and nobody wants to do anything about it. My dad blindly trusts Luis. My sister is completely blinded by her relationship, and I'm here, trapped in the middle of a fire without being able to call the fire department. Update 2. After the disasters that were my conversations with my dad and sister, I came to a conclusion. If I wanted real answers, I had to go straight to the source, that is, talk to Luis. I can't deny that I was nervous. Luis is one of those guys who always has something to say, someone who overwhelms you with his confidence even if he's not right. So, I prepared myself well before doing it. I gathered all the information I could, comments from employees, client experiences, even details about the financial problems that were already evident. I decided not to do it in public or with anyone else present. I didn't want this to turn into a show. I sent Luis a message telling him we needed to talk about the business and that I preferred to do it in private. To my surprise, he readily agreed. We met at a coffee shop near the office. I arrived first and ordered a coffee, although I was so nervous I could barely drink it. When Luis arrived, he came with his typical confident attitude, grinning from ear to ear, greeting me as if we were best friends. "What's up, brother-in-law? Everything okay?" he said as he sat down. Right then and there, I knew it was going to be a difficult conversation. I didn't want to beat around the bush, so I got straight to the point. I told him I was worried about the state of the business and that I had heard comments from clients and employees about how things were going. Luis, of course, didn't take it seriously. I know where you're going with this," he said as he leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. "I'm sure they've told you I'm changing things." "Well, yes, I am. Because this business needed it. It was stagnant, man. I'm bringing innovation." I had to restrain myself from responding sarcastically. Instead, I explained that it wasn't about innovating or not, but about the consequences of his decisions. I told him about the employees who had quit, the clients who had complained, and, yes, also about the rumors of mismanagement of money. This is where things started to escalate. Luis interrupted me before I could finish. "Look, I know you have a problem with me because your dad gave me this opportunity instead of you," he said, almost as if he were reading a script. "And I understand. It must be difficult. But that doesn't mean you have to go around looking for excuses to discredit me." That comment made my blood boil. I replied that this had nothing to do with jealousy, that my concerns were legitimate and based on facts. But he simply dismissed it. The employees who left were dinosaurs. They couldn't adapt. And the clients who complain. Well, you can't please everyone. The money thing, that's ridiculous. Where are you getting these ideas? Why did I buy a new car? Why did I go on vacation? Man, I paid for that with my own money. I don't know who's making these things up, but you should stop listening to them. I tried to calm down and explain to him that I wasn't there to fight, but to look for a solution. I suggested that if he really wanted to show that he was doing things right, he should be more transparent with the finances and listen more to the employees. His response was a simple, That's not necessary. I know what I'm doing. If anyone has a problem with me, they can come talk to me directly. By this point, it was clear that Luis wasn't going to admit any mistakes or accept any criticism. All he said was that he had a vision for the business and that he just needed time for others to adapt to his way of working. The worst came at the end of the conversation when I got up to leave. Luis looked at me with that arrogant smile of his and said, "Look, brother-in-law, I understand you're worried, but this business isn't just your dad's anymore, you know? Now it's mine too. So, while I appreciate your comments, maybe you should focus on other things. I have this under control." That comment left me speechless. His too. What the hell did that mean? I left there feeling defeated and more frustrated than ever. Luis was not only incapable of acknowledging his mistakes, but he seemed convinced that he was entitled to everything my family had built. That night, I spoke with one of the former employees who still works at the company. I asked him directly if there was anything in the business paperwork that might indicate that Luis had some kind of official stake. I didn't expect there to be anything, but what he told me chilled me to the bone. A few months ago, my dad had signed a document giving Luis a share of the business. He doesn't know the details, but apparently, Luis now has a significant percentage. I can't believe it. My dad not only handed over operational control to Luis, but he also gave him a part of the company. And he did it without telling me anything. This not only affects the future of the business, but also my grandfather's legacy, something I thought my dad always valued as much as I did. Now I'm at a point where I feel I need to make a more drastic decision. I could try talking to my dad again, this time with more information and a more direct tone. Or I could seek legal advice to see if there's anything I can do. But, whatever it is, I feel like I'm walking on very thin ice, and any wrong step could break the little piece that remains in my family. Update 3. After what Luis told me at the coffee shop and what I confirmed with the employee about his stake in the business, I couldn't leave things as they were. My mind kept racing, trying to understand how everything had gotten to this point. How could my dad give him not only the operation but also a part of the business without even mentioning it? I felt betrayed, not only by Luis but also by my own father. This business wasn't just a family job, it was part of our history, something my grandfather had started from scratch. I decided that I needed clear answers. I could no longer rely only on what the employees told me or what Luis insinuated. I needed documents, something concrete that would help me understand the magnitude of what was happening. So I asked for help from an old family friend who's an accountant and who has always advised us on legal and financial matters. I called him and briefly explained my concern. I didn't give him all the details because I didn't want to involve him too much, but I asked him to help me review the financial and legal records of the business. We met a couple of days later at his office. He brought several documents, some of which he had already reviewed on his own, and others that were more up to date. What I found was much worse than I imagined. First, we confirmed that Luis does indeed have a 30% stake in the business. My dad had signed the papers about 6 months ago. Not only that, but apparently the agreement included a clause that gave Luis total operational control, meaning he had the final say in key decisions, even over my dad. This explained why my dad had been so evasive when I talked to him. Legally, he couldn't do anything without Luis's approval. Second, the financial records showed an alarming pattern in recent months. Operating expenses had increased significantly, but there was no corresponding increase in revenue. In fact, sales were declining, and several large clients had stopped working with us. Some of these expenses were justified, such as the purchase of new equipment or materials, but others seemed suspicious. My friend pointed out several transactions labeled administrative expenses that didn't have a clear description. Some of these included payments to accounts I didn't recognize, and others were one-time payments that seemed, at best, unnecessary. One of those payments particularly caught my attention. A large withdrawal made shortly before Luis bought the new car I mentioned in the previous update. Although I couldn't prove anything at that time, everything pointed to Luis using company funds to finance his lifestyle. After finishing the review, my friend looked at me with a worried expression. "Look," he said, "this isn't right. Too many things don't add up. If you keep seeing things like this, you should consider taking legal action. You could try talking to your dad again, but honestly, this seems bigger than just mismanagement. It could be something more serious." When I left that meeting, I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. On the one hand, I was furious with Luis for taking advantage of my dad's trust, furious with my dad for allowing it, and furious with myself for not having seen this coming sooner. On the other hand, I felt devastated. This business was much more than money or prestige to me. It was my grandfather's legacy, something he built with so much effort, and which my dad had taken care of for decades. And now it was being destroyed little by someone who clearly had neither the interest nor the ability to manage it. That night, I decided to confront my dad again. I couldn't leave it like this. I called his house and asked him to meet me the next day. This time it wasn't going to be a casual conversation. I was going to bring him all the documents and make him see reality, whether he liked it or not. When I arrived at his house, my dad was already waiting in the living room. He looked tired, as if he knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy. I told him directly that I had reviewed the business records and that I knew he had given Luis a stake and operational control. At first, he tried to justify it. Luis is young, he has new ideas, and I thought it would be best for everyone. But when I showed him the suspicious transactions and the financial problems, his expression changed. At first, he denied that Luis was doing anything wrong. There must be an explanation, he said. Luis wouldn't do something like that. But the more I showed him, the more speechless he became. Finally, after a long silence, he looked at me and said something that broke my heart. "What do you want me to do?" I already gave him my word. I can't back down. Now, if we make a scandal, it will be worse for everyone. I tried to explain to him that it wasn't about a scandal, but about protecting the business and our family's legacy. I asked him to consider seeking legal advice to annul the agreement with Luis, or at least limit his control. But my dad simply refused. "It's already done," he said in a defeated tone. "I don't want to fight with your sister, and I don't want this to divide the family." I left that conversation more frustrated than ever. My dad was more worried about avoiding family conflict than about saving the business. And meanwhile, Luis continued doing whatever he wanted without any consequences. I didn't know what to do now. Talking to Luis was useless, and my dad seemed resigned. I was beginning to seriously consider seeking legal help on my own, even though I knew that could cause an irreparable rift in my family. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, and any decision I made could cause everything to collapse. Update 4. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more complicated, it turns out I was wrong. After the conversation with my dad, I decided to take a couple of days to think before taking the next step. I felt like I was at a dead end, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't stand idly by while Luis continued to sink the business. That's when I received a message from my sister. It was short and to the point, but it had a tone that was already familiar to me. "We need to talk. Can you come to the house?" She didn't mention what it was about, but I had a bad feeling. Still, I went because I knew that sooner or later I would have to face her. When I arrived, she was already waiting for me in the living room, visibly upset. She didn't even wait for me to sit down before starting. "What the hell are you doing?" she said, crossing her arms. At first, I didn't understand what she was referring to, but she soon clarified. "I found out you've been investigating Luis and talking to the business employees. What do you think you're accomplishing with that? Do you know how you're making him feel? He just wants to help our family, and you're acting like he's a criminal." Her tone was a mix of anger and disappointment, as if I were the villain in this story. I tried to stay calm and explain to her that it wasn't about attacking Luis, but about protecting the business. I told her about the financial problems, the employee complaints, and the questionable decisions he had made. But she didn't want to hear it. "That's not your problem," she said coldly. "Dad gave him that responsibility because he trusts him. If you can't accept it, that's your problem, not Luis's." What hurt me most wasn't her tone, but the way she minimized everything. To her, it seemed like I was exaggerating, as if the fact that Luis was running the business into the ground didn't matter because, according to her, everything can be fixed with time. I replied that time was precisely what we didn't have, that the business was already in a critical situation. But she looked at me as if I were speaking a different language. What really ignited the argument was when I mentioned the suspicious transactions. I thought that at least that would make her hesitate a little. But instead, she became even more defensive. "Seriously?" she said with an incredulous smile. "Are you suggesting that Luis is stealing? Do you know how offensive that is? He's put everything he has into moving the business forward, while you're just looking for ways to discredit him." I told her it wasn't an accusation, but a legitimate concern based on facts. But she wasn't listening to me anymore. The conversation became increasingly tense until, finally, she dropped the bomb. You know what? I think. I think this has nothing to do with the business. I think you're jealous of Luis because he's achieving what you never could. You always thought this business would be yours, right? But Dad decided to give it to someone else, and now you can't stand it. Those words hit me harder than I expected because, if I'm completely honest, there was a time when I did think the business would be mine someday. But not because I wanted it for myself, but because I always saw myself as the one who was going to carry on my grandfather's legacy. However, hearing my sister say it that way, as if all this was a matter of ego, made me feel more alone than ever. I tried to reason with her one last time, telling her that this wasn't personal, that I just wanted to protect what our family had built. But her answer was blunt. If you're so worried about the business, why don't you start your own? Stop meddling where you don't belong. I left her house feeling completely defeated. I never thought my sister could be so much on Luis's side, to the point of ignoring everything that was happening. But now it's clear that for her, this isn't just a matter of loyalty, but also of pride. She's so convinced that Luis is the best option for the business that she can't accept the possibility that he's wrong, or worse, that he's acting in bad faith. That night, as I was trying to process everything, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. If my sister was so willing to defend Luis, even with everything I already knew, then maybe she was also benefiting from this situation in some way. What if it wasn't just Luis who was profiting from the business? Now I have more questions than answers. How much does my sister know? Is she involved in something? And, most importantly, what should I do now? Every step I take seems to distance me further from my family, but I also feel like I can't give up. This isn't just about money anymore, or about who's right. It's about something much bigger. Final update. After the conversation with my sister, I reached a breaking point. I had done everything possible to try to save the business and protect my grandfather's legacy, but every attempt only distanced me further from my family. My dad was too resigned, my sister too blinded by her loyalty to Luis. And Luis, well, Luis was still Luis, with his I know what I'm doing attitude, while things crumbled around him. I decided that the best thing for my mental health was to walk away. That was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made because it meant accepting that I couldn't fix something that was already broken. It hurt my soul, but I understood that I couldn't keep fighting alone while everyone else closed their eyes. So I distanced myself. I stopped trying to talk to my dad and sister. I stopped investigating the state of the business and focused on my own life. I got a new job in a company that had nothing to do with the family business. And although at first it was strange not to be involved in what had been part of my daily life for so long, little by little, I began to feel lighter. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off me. During that time, I kept in touch with some former employees of the business who now worked elsewhere. Occasionally, I'd hear how things were going, that they'd lost more clients, that the debts continued to accumulate, that several of Luis's new employees didn't last 3 months. But I tried not to get involved. Every time I heard something new, it only reaffirmed that I had made the right decision by walking away. A year passed in the blink of an eye. I was calmer, working on personal projects and building a life away from family drama. Until, one day, out of the blue, I received a call from my sister. I had avoided answering her calls for months, but something in me made me answer. Her voice sounded different. She wasn't angry or defensive like the last time we spoke. This time, she was desperate. She told me, almost without greeting me, that the business was on the verge of bankruptcy. According to her, things had spiraled completely out of control. They had lost almost all their major clients. The debts were insurmountable, and employees were resigning en masse. Luis, apparently, had tried to save it by taking out loans, but all he managed to do was sink the ship further. Now they were facing lawsuits and foreclosures, and my dad was devastated. "We need your help," she said in a pleading tone I had never heard from her. She explained that my dad had fallen into a state of depression because he felt he had failed. Luis, on the other hand, had practically disappeared, leaving my sister to deal with everything. She asked me to come back, to try to rescue the business and fix the mess they had created. For a moment, I was silent, trying to process everything she was telling me. So much had happened, so many arguments, so many accusations, and now they were coming to me for help, after having ignored all my warnings. I responded with all the calmness I could muster. "I'm not coming back." My sister was silent for a moment, probably surprised by my answer. Then she tried to argue. Please, it's not just for me. It's for Dad. He needs you. This is something we can overcome together. But I had already made my decision. I told her I was sorry, that it truly pained me to know that my dad was going through all of that, but that I couldn't get involved again. Not after how they treated me. Not after they chose to ignore me when I tried to warn them. If you want to get out of this, you'll have to do it yourselves, I said. I already gave everything I could, and you decided to go another way. Now you have to live with the consequences. She tried to insist, but I ended the call before she could say anything else. I felt guilty, I won't lie. As much as I tried to justify my decision, a part of me still wanted to help, especially for my dad. But I knew that if I got involved again, I would only end up in the same place as before, frustrated, exhausted, and without any support. A few months later, I learned from a former employee that the business had officially closed. The banks took the assets, and the property where the business was located was foreclosed. Luis, of course, was no longer on the scene, and my sister had to move back in with my parents. I don't know how they are now because I still haven't resumed contact with them. As painful as it is to say, the business died the day my dad handed control over to Luis. All I did was accept reality before they did. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right decision by walking away. But then I remember everything I went through, everything I tried to do, and I realized that I couldn't save something that nobody else wanted to save. Now, all I can do is move on, honoring my grandfather's legacy in my own way, even if that means doing it away from my family. Story 5. I went to work abroad to build my house and send money to my parents. But when I returned, I realized that my sister had taken over my house and my money. I've been carrying a mix of emotions that I don't even know where to begin to explain. Anger, sadness, disappointment, and also a lot of confusion. I think what hurts me most about all of this is the betrayal, especially because it comes from the people I love the most and whom I trusted the most, my family. I'm going to try to tell this from the beginning so you can understand how I got to this point. A little over 3 years ago, I made a decision that completely changed my life. Like many others, I decided to leave my country and look for work abroad. It wasn't an easy decision. It hurt to leave my parents, my sister, and everything I knew, but I felt I had no other choice. My family has never had a lot of money. We are simple people, but we've always managed to get by. My parents worked their whole lives to provide us with the basics, but they are older now, and I wanted to help them live more comfortably. Also, ever since I was little, my dad promised me a piece of land where someday I could build my own house. I always dreamed of that, a place I could call my own, built with my own effort. That's why I left. I found a job in a restaurant abroad, and although it was extremely hard at first, I managed. I worked long hours, double shifts almost every day. My plan was to save as much money as possible, send it home, and ask my dad to supervise the construction of my house while I continued working. I also wanted to help my parents with their expenses. I wanted them to have a dignified old age without worries. Everything seemed to be going well. Every month I sent money, and my dad sent me photos of the progress. Construction was slow but steady. My sister, who was living with my parents at the time, also kept me updated. She told me they were all very excited, that the house was turning out beautiful. I couldn't wait to return and see the result of my effort with my own eyes. 2 weeks ago, I finally returned home after 3 years. I was so excited. I thought it would be one of the happiest moments of my life, but what I found was a nightmare. The house is there, but it's not mine. My sister moved in with her husband and children. They told me they needed the space because I wasn't there. And that's not all. The money I sent in the last few months wasn't even used for the house. Apparently, they used it to help my sister start a business. I don't know what to do. I feel like my world has fallen apart. I worked like a slave for 3 years thinking I was building a future for myself and my family. And now I feel like a stranger in my own home. Update 1. It's been a few days since I returned, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. At first, when I arrived at the house, I thought there was some kind of confusion. I saw clothes hanging that weren't my parents', children's toys in the yard, and what made my stomach drop? A truck parked outside that I knew belonged to my brother-in-law. I went in with a nervous smile, thinking maybe they were visiting, but no, they were already living there. My sister greeted me as if nothing had happened, with a quick hug and a smile that seemed strange to me. She said, "It's so good that you're here, we were waiting for you." At that moment, I didn't understand what she meant by that. It was when I saw my parents that everything started to make sense, although in the worst possible way. My parents were nervous, as if they knew that what they were going to tell me wouldn't please me. My dad took me to the kitchen while my mom stayed in the living room with my sister. That's where he broke the news. The house, my house, was no longer mine. Look, son, your sister and her husband have had a lot of problems these past few years. They were in a complicated situation with debts and 2 small children. The truth is they needed a place to live, and your mom and I thought it was best for them to move here while you were away. You weren't using the house, and they needed it. I couldn't even speak. The words just wouldn't come out. My dad kept talking as if he wanted to justify what he had done. He told me that family is the most important thing, that we all have to help each other, and that I shouldn't worry because there's always room for me at their house. What room? The dining room couch? The room where my nephews sleep now? I tried to explain to them, with all the calmness I could muster, that this house wasn't just a house to me. It was the result of 3 years of sacrifices, of double shifts, of days when I barely ate to save more money. It wasn't just a roof. It was my dream, my future, what motivated me to keep going when I felt far from everything. But they didn't understand. My dad said I was exaggerating, that in the end, the house was still in the family. My mom tried to smooth things over by telling me that they understood I was upset, but that I should be patient and give my sister time to get settled. And my sister didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with that neutral expression that made my blood boil. When I finally asked her directly why she didn't tell me anything, why she didn't ask for my permission, she answered with something I can't get out of my head. It's just that you weren't here. Someone had to use the house, and we needed it more. That night, I locked myself in what was once my room, but now is a storage room full of old things. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I spent hours going over the conversations I had with them while I was abroad, all the times they sent me photos of the progress and assured me that everything was going well. How could they deceive me like that? I feel betrayed, not only by my sister, but also by my parents. They knew what that house meant to me, and yet they decided to give it to my sister without even consulting me. The next day, I tried to talk to them again. I asked them to at least return part of the money I sent for the construction if they couldn't give me back the house. My dad got angry. He told me I was being selfish, that I was putting money above family. My mom started crying and accused me of creating conflicts where there weren't any. I don't know what to do. Every time I try to reason with them, they make me feel like I'm the villain of the story, as if my anger isn't justified. I'm emotionally exhausted. On the one hand, I love my family. I want to believe they didn't do this with bad intentions. But on the other hand, I can't accept what they did. This is not right. Update 2. I thought things couldn't get any worse, but as usual, I was wrong. After trying to talk to my family without reaching any agreement, I decided to look for another solution. Someone in the comments of my original post suggested I review the house paperwork to see if there was anything I could do legally. That idea seemed logical to me, so I went to look for the documents. I knew that my dad was the one who had handled everything related to the land and construction while I was away. From the beginning, I trusted him. I never doubted that everything was in order. But when I asked him for the house papers, his reaction seemed strange to me. At first, he avoided the subject, saying he didn't know exactly where they were and that my mom had probably put them away somewhere. But I insisted. I wasn't going to let it go. Finally, after much insistence, my dad gave me a folder with some documents. As soon as I opened it, I felt like the world was crashing down on me. The house wasn't in my name. In fact, it wasn't even in my dad's or mom's name. It was in my sister's name. I couldn't believe it. I stared at that paper as if it were a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The deed to the house had been signed 2 years ago, right when I had started sending more money because we were in the final stages of construction. While I worked like crazy thinking I was building something for myself, my dad had transferred everything to my sister's name without even mentioning it to me. I didn't hold back. I went straight to the living room where my parents and my sister were, and I showed them the papers. I asked for an explanation, although at this point, I don't know if I really expected an answer that could justify what they did. My dad was the first to speak. He said they had decided to put the house in my sister's name because, according to him, it was more practical. She lives here, son. It was easier to handle things this way. You were far away, and we didn't want to complicate you with the paperwork from abroad. More practical. Those 2 words echoed in my mind. More practical for whom? because it clearly wasn't practical for me. I told them that didn't make sense, that I was the one who had paid for everything, that this house belonged to me. My dad raised his voice, something he rarely does, and told me not to be so dramatic, that the house was still in the family, and that I should be grateful that they had taken care of it. My mom, as always, tried to calm the situation, although in a way that only made me feel worse. Son, understand, all of this was done for the good of everyone. It's not that we don't love you or that we don't value what you did, but your sister and the children were going through a very difficult time. We couldn't leave them on the street. You have your life set where you were, and they don't. Life set. That was her way of summarizing 3 years of sacrifices, loneliness, and tireless work. According to them, because I wasn't here, because I didn't experience the difficulties they experienced, I automatically had less right to claim what was mine. And my sister, she remained silent almost the entire time, as if she had nothing to do with all of this. She only spoke at the end, and what she said made me feel even more powerless. Don't take it so personally, brother. You know everything stays in the family. When things get better, we can return some of the money to you. But you have to understand that right now we can't. We did all of this to get ahead. You have to trust that we did it with good intentions. Good intentions? Do they really think that saying that makes everything all right? I got up and left the house because I knew that if I stayed, I would explode. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood trying to calm down, but every time I remembered those words, I felt a burning in my chest. That night, I slept at a childhood friend's house. I couldn't stay there, in a house that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by people who, although they are my family, did this to me. Since then, I've been looking for a way to deal with this, but I feel that every step I take only confirms that I'm alone in this. My family not only took my house, they took away the trust one had in them, and I don't know if that can be recovered. Update 3. After a few days away from home, during which I went from sadness to anger and then to a kind of momentary resignation, I decided that the best thing would be to try to resolve this in a more direct and rational way. Although I feel deeply betrayed, I didn't want to escalate this problem into a bigger conflict, at least not yet. I thought that maybe if I talked directly to my sister, I could find a solution. I made a huge effort to calm down before looking for her. I repeated to myself over and over again that the important thing was not to lose my cool, that if I went into that conversation angry, it would only make things worse. So one evening, I returned to the house and asked to speak with my sister alone. We sat in the living room, in the same place where I had so often dreamed of my future while the house was being built. Now that place felt like a foreign space, filled with her children's toys, photos of her family on the walls, and the echo of my own sacrifices thrown in the trash. I explained how I felt. I told her that I understood that she and her family had gone through difficult times and that I didn't want to leave them without a place to live, but I also made it clear that the house wasn't hers. I asked her that if they couldn't return the house to me, to at least return a part of the money I sent, not all of it, because I understand they are using the house, but something, even if it were just a gesture to show that they acknowledge what I did. Her reaction left me stunned. At first, she didn't say anything. She looked at me as if I were speaking a different language. Then she sighed deeply, as if she were the victim in all of this, and said, "Look, brother, I know you're upset, but you have to understand that things aren't that simple. I can't return something that is now my family's home. And about the money, we don't have any way to return it to you right now. We're barely getting by with the business, and every penny we earn goes towards the children and the debts. It's not that I don't want to help you, but we can't." I felt a knot in my stomach, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst was what she said next. She leaned forward, and with an almost condescending tone, she said, "Besides, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. The house belongs to the family, not just you. You left, we stayed here. I think you should be grateful that, thanks to you, we have a place to live. In the end, this is also your accomplishment, even if you don't see it that way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Grateful? That I should be grateful because they appropriated something I worked day and night for? Because they used my money without consulting me? The calmness I had tried to maintain vanished at that moment. I replied that I wasn't looking for gratitude or applause, that all I wanted was what rightfully belonged to me. Her response was even worse. "It's just that you never understood how things work here. You left thinking about yourself, and we had to manage as best we could. Now you come to complain, but you don't know how difficult it has been for us. Thinking about themselves? That's all I heard in my mind when I said to her, thinking about yourselves, right? Not about me. Not about how I had to break my back to give you what you have now, and not about what this house means to me. The conversation ended there. I stood up and left. My sister didn't even try to stop me. She just sat there as if nothing had happened, as if my pain and my words carried no weight. Since then, I've stopped trying to talk to her. I don't know what else I can do. My sister is not willing to return the house or the money to me, and my parents seem to be on her side. I feel completely alone in this situation, as if 3 years of work meant nothing. Now I'm looking for other options, but the truth is I don't know if I want to keep fighting for this. The house, although it hurts to say it, no longer feels like mine. It feels tainted by betrayal, by selfishness, by this feeling of emptiness I can't shake off. I don't know if I'm losing the house or if I've already lost something much more important, my trust in my family. Update 4. After that last conversation with my sister, something changed in me. It wasn't just anger. It was a mix of helplessness, exhaustion, and the feeling that I was losing a battle I never imagined I would have to fight. But I still knew I couldn't leave it like this. It wasn't just about the house or the money, but about the principle of the whole thing. What they did wasn't right, and if I continued to allow it, it would be like telling them it was okay to walk all over me. A friend I told everything to suggested I talk to a lawyer. At first, I hesitated. Part of me felt that doing so would be like declaring war on my own family, and that was the last thing I wanted. But I also knew I couldn't continue letting myself be manipulated. So, with some fear and a lot of uncertainty, I went to consult with a lawyer he recommended. I explained the whole situation, from the money I sent for the construction of the house to the fact that the deed was now in my sister's name. He listened attentively, taking notes and asking questions. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, reviewing the documents I had brought. Finally, he looked up and told me something that left me speechless. Legally, the house isn't yours. Since it's in your sister's name, she has all the rights to the property. Even though you financed the construction, without a contract or any document that proves that money was specifically for your house, it's very difficult for you to claim anything. I felt like he had punched me in the chest. But that wasn't all. He told me it was possible that even the land no longer belonged to my dad, because, according to the records, the transfer to my sister's name included both the house and the land. My father had made the complete transfer without notifying me, and now there was nothing legally connecting that property to me. I asked him if there was anything I could do, anything that would give me at least a chance to recover what was mine. His answer was direct. You could sue, but it would be a long and costly process, and there's no guarantee you'll win. Besides, since it's a family matter, the other party could argue that the money was a gift or help for the family. Without concrete proof, it's your word against theirs. The word gift burned me like fire. It wasn't a gift. It was never a gift. It was my dream, my effort, my sacrifice. But now all of that meant nothing before the law. When I left the lawyer's office, I felt more lost than ever. But the worst came later, when I reviewed the documents I had taken to the consultation more calmly. Among the papers, there was a receipt for a large transfer I had made a year ago, money I had sent specifically to buy furniture and finish some details of the house. I clearly remembered talking to my dad about that money. He had assured me that everything would be for the house, that it would be the last investment before I returned. But then I remembered something my sister told me in our argument, that they had used the money to start her business. At the time, I hadn't connected it, but reviewing the receipt and the dates, everything clicked into place. The money I sent for my house was what they used to open my sister's store. I didn't know whether to feel anger or sadness. How could they lie to me like that? Look me in the eye and tell me that everything was going well while they were using my money for something completely different? They didn't just take my house. They also decided what to do with my effort without even consulting me. That night, I called my parents to talk to them about what I had discovered. My mom answered, and when I asked her directly why they used my money for something else, she was silent for a moment. Then she started crying, telling me they had no other choice, that my sister was in a desperate situation, and that they thought I would understand. Understand, Mom? You didn't even tell me. You lied to me. You made me believe I was investing in my future when in reality you had already decided that my money didn't belong to me. My dad took the phone at that moment and told me something I will never forget. Son, We did it because we trusted that you could get ahead on your own. Your sister needed us more. You have to stop thinking only about yourself. Thinking about myself. That was their conclusion. According to them, claiming what is mine is being selfish, while betraying me in this way is, apparently, an act of familial love. I don't know how to continue dealing with this. I feel like a stranger in my own family. Everything I did, everything I sacrificed, seems to have been in vain. How can you recover something when the people you love are the ones who took it from you? Final update. After weeks filled with frustration, useless conversations, and discoveries that only made things worse, I came to a conclusion that hurt me more than words can say. There is nothing more I can do. I can't get the house back. I can't get the money back. And most importantly, I can't get the relationship I had with my family back. Everything broke in a way that feels irreparable. That morning, I woke up early and started packing my things. I didn't have much with me, just a suitcase with clothes and a few souvenirs I brought from the United States. Most of my belongings were in the house I built, the house that is no longer mine. But I didn't have the strength to fight for them. I preferred to leave them behind along with everything else. Before I left, I wanted to say goodbye to my parents. Although I was furious and disappointed, I didn't want to simply disappear without saying anything. When I entered the living room, my mom was sitting on the sofa watching television as if nothing was happening. I stood in front of her and said, "I'm leaving. I hope you're happy with what you did because I can't stay here anymore. I don't want to fight anymore or keep trying to fix something you've already decided to destroy. I wish you well with your house and your business. I'm not coming back." My mom started crying. She told me she didn't want things to end this way, that I was her son, and that they had always loved me. But her words sounded empty to me. How can you tell someone you love them while taking what is theirs, and then expect them to just accept it? My dad came into the living room while I was talking, and as always, he tried to justify what they did. He told me I was exaggerating, that things would eventually work out. But I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I replied that what they did had no justification, and that if they really cared, they would never have put me in this situation. My sister wasn't home at that moment, which was a relief. I don't know if I could have stayed calm if I had seen her. Her words, her attitude, everything she did. There's no way I can forgive her. And the worst part is, I don't think she even cares. I took my suitcase and left without looking back. I felt like every step towards the bus terminal was like tearing a part of myself away, but I also knew that if I stayed, I would only continue sinking. Family shouldn't make you feel this way. It shouldn't destroy you. I returned to the United States with a mix of pain and relief. Pain because I still find it hard to believe that my own family betrayed me this way. Relief because I'm finally away from all of that. I've decided to cut off all contact with them. I blocked my sister from all social media and my phone. It was harder with my parents, but in the end, I did the same. For years, I was the son who always wanted to help, who thought of them before himself. But they never thought of me, and I can't carry that weight anymore. I went back to work and focused on my life here. At first, I felt like something was missing, as if a part of me had stayed in my country along with that house and the memories of what I thought was my family. But little by little, I've begun to rebuild myself. I've realized that family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one you choose. I've made new friends, people who truly value what I do and support me without expecting anything in return. There are still days when I think about everything that happened, and I feel a mix of anger and sadness. But I also know that the best thing I could do was to walk away. My plan now is simple: start from scratch. I no longer want to build something for others. Now I want to build something for myself. If I ever buy a house again, it will be just mine. And if I ever trust someone again, it will be because they've earned it. It hurts to have left my family behind. Of course it does. But I've learned that sometimes the only way to move forward is to let go of those who don't value you, even if it hurts like hell. At the end of the day, I'm better off here, far from them, but closer to finding my own peace. Story 6. After 30 years at the same company, I was replaced by the nephew of my supervisor. I never thought I would tell this story because, honestly, it's always embarrassed me. And it's not because I feel like I did anything wrong, but because it seems like by telling it, I'm looking for pity or complaining about what happened. But that's not it. Or well, maybe I am complaining a little. The truth is, I just want to get it off my chest, even if no one listens or if this gets lost among thousands of more important stories. I'm 50 years old, and a few months ago, after 30 years of work, I was fired from the company where I spent practically my whole life. They just let me go. And the worst part is that they replaced me with my supervisor's nephew, a young, smiling guy fresh out of college. Me, on the other hand, I left with nothing, carrying a box with my belongings and the feeling of having been used, as if the 30 years I spent there hadn't been worth anything. I worked in a logistics company, in the inventory department. I arrived when I was 20 years old, recently married and without experience, but eager to work. Back then, the company was smaller and everything was simpler. We didn't have complicated systems or software that calculated everything automatically. Everything was done by hand and with great care. I learned from those who were there before me, and little by little, I earned my place. I started as an assistant, then they gave me more responsibilities, and before I knew it, I was in charge of the department. I don't know if it was a very important position, but for me it was. I put my heart and soul into that job. I don't want you to think that I'm romanticizing my time at the company. I had my bad days, like anyone, but it was a job I understood that made me feel useful and allowed me to support my family. I never missed a day of work, not even when I was sick or when things at home got complicated. I even sacrificed my children's birthdays and anniversaries with my wife because the inventory won't do itself, as I used to joke. Although now that I think about it, maybe it wasn't a joke. Everything started to change a few years ago when the company was bought and new management came in. One of the supervisors, who I never really liked or disliked, brought in her own trusted group. At first I wasn't worried. I thought, what could they do? I've been here almost my whole life. Big mistake. You always think that the years protect you, that experience is worth something, but in the end it's not. One day you're a fundamental part of the team, and the next they're taking you to human resources with a fake smile. The first time I saw the supervisor's nephew was a few months ago. He arrived with an iron shirt, a shiny watch, and that confidence that only young people who think they know everything have. The supervisor introduced him as support to modernize the processes. Those were her words. I remember shaking his hand and telling him I was there for whatever he needed, even though no one asked me to teach him anything. I'm not stupid. At that moment I knew something wasn't right, but I reassured myself thinking it was just my paranoia. A couple of weeks went by, and I saw him more and more in my office. Although it was more like a corner where I spent more time than in my own house. The guy asked questions, took notes on his laptop, and made calls with strange words like optimization, predictive software, and I don't know what else. I watched him and didn't understand anything, but I kept quiet. I felt that if I said something, I would be a foolish old man who doesn't want to adapt, so I stayed there, silent, watching as little by little they erased me from the map. The final blow came on a Friday afternoon, as if ending the week with a kick in the stomach wasn't enough. They called me to human resources, and there was the supervisor, along with another person I had never seen. They told me that the company was in the process of restructuring, and that they had made the difficult decision to give me the opportunity to retire with dignity. Nice words, right? But in the end, the translation was simple. You're fired. I was speechless. I didn't say anything, not even ask why. What for? I already knew the answer. The nephew was ready to sit in my chair. They didn't give me time to say goodbye to anyone. They escorted me to my space. They gave me a box, and I put my things in it. A couple of pens, some old papers, and a photo of my family that I had stuck on the wall years ago. When I walked out the door, I felt like I was leaving a part of myself there that I would never get back. Since that day, I haven't set foot in the company again. At first, I would wake up at 6 in the morning, as always, ready to leave, only to remember that I had nowhere to go. I've looked for work, but at my age it's not easy. Every interview feels like a humiliation, and the worst part is that you start to believe that you're no longer useful. Now I do odd jobs here and there, and although my wife tells me that everything will be fine, I feel like I've lost something that can't be recovered. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because I've had a lump in my throat for months, because I feel invisible, and because I needed someone, even for a moment, to hear my story. At my age, interviews are more like an uncomfortable formality. They sit me there, they look me up and down, and when I tell them that I worked for 30 years in inventory, they smile condescendingly. Would you adapt to the new digital systems? What is your level of technological expertise? It's a question that seems innocent, but it's not. What they're really saying is, are you too old for this position? The other day, after an interview that went nowhere, I received an unexpected call. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered out of habit, with that reflex from when my job depended on answering the phone at any hour. "Mr. Hector," said a hurried voice. "This is Mariana, from supplier's name." At first it took me a few seconds to place who she was. She was one of the representatives of a major supplier I worked with for years. We had always had good communication. She used to call me to coordinate deliveries and confirm inventory numbers. "Is everything all right, Mariana?" I replied, confused. "Look, I'm sorry to bother you, but we've been trying to reach your replacement for weeks." The young man, the supervisor's nephew. "He doesn't answer emails, he doesn't answer calls, and we have a huge delay with the orders. I thought you still worked there because, well, you always resolve these things." I was speechless. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel worse. I explained that I didn't work there anymore, that they had fired me months ago. Mariana was silent for a few seconds and then let out a resigned, "Oh, I see. What a shame. Honestly, you were the only reason everything worked on time." I wanted to answer something, but I just said, "Thank you." I hung up the phone and stared at the screen for several minutes, as if waiting for someone else to call me. What I thought would be an exception became a habit. In the following weeks, I received more calls from suppliers and even from a couple of associates who worked directly with the company. It was always the same. They were looking for answers that no one was giving them. The nephew didn't answer emails, he didn't make decisions, and the processes were falling apart. Once, a supplier I had known for years asked me, "Why did you leave, Mr. Hector? Everything was easier with you." I wanted to answer him that I didn't leave, that they threw me out as if I was worthless, but I just said, "Company things," and that was it. I hung up the call and felt a strange mixture of pride and anger. Pride because, apparently, my job wasn't as easy as the nephew thought, but anger because they had decided that I was dispensable, that someone else could do my job better than me. At night, I told my wife what was happening. She listened attentively, and, although she didn't say it, I knew what she was thinking. "Why do you keep answering those calls?" Honestly, I don't know. Maybe because, even though they don't pay me anymore, I feel useful again, even if it's just for a minute. Maybe because, deep down, I want them to realize the mistake they made in replacing me. But you know what's the worst part? No one from the company has called me. Not my supervisor, not the nephew, no one. They don't care that their suppliers are upset or that things are going wrong. They simply left a hole where I was and filled it with someone who doesn't even know how the inventory works. Update 1. After those calls from the suppliers, something changed in me. I couldn't say if it was anger, frustration, or simply a need to get rid of that feeling of uselessness, because that's what I felt, that I was good for nothing. The company had discarded me. The interviews were leading nowhere, and my days were spent looking at the phone and getting lost in my thoughts. One day, while I was drinking cold coffee in the kitchen, my wife said something that hurt me, even though she didn't mean it. "Have you thought about looking for another type of job? Something temporary, even if it's just to distract yourself." "Just to distract yourself?" She said it with affection, but what I understood was, "You can't keep sitting here feeling like a burden." I don't blame her. She was doing the best she could not to see me fall apart. So I started accepting temporary jobs, the kind that don't require interviews or resumes, just showing up and enduring the hours. The first one was as a helper in a moving company. They called me because a neighbor needed strong people to carry furniture in boxes. I accepted without thinking twice. The first day was brutal. 10 hours lifting and lowering things, putting them in trucks and unloading them in other people's houses. I ended up with a sore back and hands full of blisters. When I got home, my wife saw me and couldn't help but say, "Hector, you're going to kill yourself like this." I replied, "At least they pay me for it." They gave me $500 pesos for the day, which isn't much if you think about it. But at that moment, I felt like I had accomplished something. Even if it's temporary, even if it's little, at least I was able to bring something home. Then came other jobs. An acquaintance offered me a package delivery job for a few days. He gave me an old motorcycle and a map with addresses. I spent hours under the sun, traveling streets I didn't even know, taking envelopes and small boxes to people who didn't even look me in the eye. Nobody thanks you, but I guess that's how this kind of work is. You don't exist beyond the delivery. The funny thing, or the sad thing, I don't know, is that one of those days I passed by my old company. It was a delivery route, so I couldn't avoid it. I recognized the building from afar, and my stomach tightened as if I was about to go into an interview. I stayed outside for a few seconds, with the engine running, looking at the entrance where I spent more time than I should have spent in my entire life. I saw some employees coming and going, people I knew and who had surely already forgotten me. For a moment I wanted to get off, go in and say, "How are you, gentlemen? Has the nephew solved the inventory problems yet? Or are the suppliers still calling me for help?" But I didn't. I stayed there, swallowing the urge and remembering that I no longer belong there. I left without delivering the package. I returned it to the distribution center later and told the manager that the recipient wasn't there. I didn't have the courage to approach. Over time, my body began to resent the temporary jobs. I'm 50 years old. I'm not a young man who can carry furniture or make deliveries for 10 hours straight. But I can't stop, because when I stop, my head starts to fill with thoughts that make me feel worse. I think about the nephew, about the office that was once mine, about how I'm now the guy who carries boxes and stays silent when customers complain about the delay in deliveries. My wife continues to support me, but I notice she's worried. She doesn't ask me how my day was anymore, because she knows she won't like the answer. My eldest son has also changed with me. He used to tell me about his things, his studies, his plans for the future. Now he doesn't anymore. And I understand. What can he tell a father who lost his job of 30 years and now barely brings money home? I feel like he looks at me with pity, even though he'll never say it. At night, when I'm alone on the couch, I think about all the things I did for the company, the years I worked beyond my hours, the days I sacrificed important moments with my family to make the inventory balance. All that was worth nothing. There was no recognition, no thank you for everything. Just a "we are restructuring." Now, as I write this, I realize something. I'm not upset with the nephew or the supervisor. I'm upset with myself for believing that loyalty was worth something, because, in the end, when you're no longer useful, they change you as if you were an old piece of gear. Update 2. I didn't think this story could get any worse, but life always finds a way to kick you when you're down. A few days ago, I received a call that left me frozen. It was around 11 a.m., right after I got back from a job where I was sanding walls for a remodel. I was drinking water in the kitchen when the phone rang. At first, I didn't recognize the number, but I answered. The voice on the other side was firm and familiar. "Hector, this is Mr. Ramirez. We need to talk." Mr. Ramirez was the owner of the company, not the supervisor, not human resources, the owner. I had known him since I arrived, at 20 years old, when he still walked the halls and knew everyone's name. Over time, he left the daily management in the hands of the supervisors, but he was still the one who signed the important decisions. "What is it about, Mr. Ramirez?" I said, feeling my stomach tighten. "I can't talk much on the phone, but there are serious problems with the inventories. Since you left, I've tried to trust what they tell me, but something doesn't add up. I want you to come to the office to talk about it in person." I was speechless for a few seconds. Go back to the office? To that place where they took me out without looking back? But the way he said it, his serious and dry tone, made it clear to me that it wasn't an optional invitation. "Okay, Mr. Ramirez, I'll go tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed thinking about all the possibilities. What problems with the inventories? Why was he calling me? Something inside me wanted to think that maybe they were calling me because they had finally realized the mistake they made in firing me. Maybe they needed me back, maybe. The next day, I put on a decent shirt, the same shoes I used to wear when I worked there, and I went. When I arrived at the company, I felt strange, like a ghost returning to a place that no longer belonged to him. The new receptionist looked at me as if I was a stranger, and I had to tell her who I was to let me in. "Wait here," she said as she made a call. A few minutes passed that felt like hours. Finally, Mr. Ramirez came out to get me. He didn't look happy. He took me to a meeting room where he, the supervisor, yes, the same one who fired me, and a guy I didn't know, but who by his attitude must have been someone from auditing, were waiting for me. "Do you know why we called you?" Mr. Ramirez said, getting straight to the point. "You mentioned something about the inventories." I replied without sitting down yet. The supervisor avoided looking me in the eye. She was always good at dodging glances when something didn't suit her. The audit guy spoke. "Since you left the company, we have found irregularities in the inventories. Merchandise that doesn't add up, inflated numbers, and, in some cases, products that simply disappeared." I looked at him without saying anything. I felt a strange heat rising up my neck, as if they were accusing me without saying it directly. And what does that have to do with me? I finally asked, trying to remain calm. Mr. Ramirez looked at me steadily and said, Hector, you were in charge of the inventory department for many years. All this started when you left, but we want to understand if anything happened before. Then I understood. They weren't saying it directly, but they were pointing the finger at me. I was the prime suspect. After 30 years of loyalty, of never missing a day, of sacrificing my family for this job, now they thought I had been stealing, or that somehow this was my fault. Are you saying that I stole something? I said, this time without containing my anger. I'm not saying that, Hector, Mr. Ramirez replied. But I need answers. Something doesn't add up here, and we need to get to the bottom of the problem. At that moment, the supervisor finally spoke, with that falsely soft voice she always used to make a good impression. Look, Hector, we're not accusing you, but you understood inventories for years and, well, maybe there were mistakes that went unnoticed. Mistakes that went unnoticed. She said it as if I had been useless, as if 30 years of work could be reduced to a cheap excuse to cover up their problems. I took a deep breath and said, I never made any mistakes that couldn't be fixed. If the numbers don't add up now, maybe you should ask your nephew. He's the one who took my place. The supervisor grimaced and remained silent. The audit guy just took notes. Mr. Ramirez didn't seem surprised by my answer. Maybe he already suspected something about the nephew. But instead of confronting him, they called me, because it was easier, because a 50-year-old man, fired and without a job, is the perfect target to blame. The meeting ended with few words. They told me that if they had any more questions, they would call me. I left that room with a hot face and my heart pounding. I walked through the hallways where everyone used to greet me, and now no one recognized me. I felt like a stranger, an intruder in what was once my second home. When I got home, my wife saw my face and knew something wasn't right. I told her everything. And what are you going to do? She asked. Nothing. I didn't do anything wrong, and they know it. If they want to blame someone, let them look for their nephew and the geniuses who replaced me. But as I say this, I can't help but feel fear. Fear that it will all end up pointing at me, because life is like that. When you're down, everyone wants to step on you a little more. Update 3. I spent whole days thinking about the inventories, about how for years I made sure everything was in order. I remembered every detail, every process, every number. I couldn't understand how in such a short time everything had fallen apart. I needed to talk to someone. I needed another perspective. I remembered Marcos, one of my former coworkers. He was a guy my age, with whom I always had a good relationship. I had known him for years, and, although we weren't close friends, we always got along well. I sent him a message. Mr. Hector, how have you been? Can we have coffee this week? I have something to tell you. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. We met at a small cafe near downtown. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a corner, with 2 coffees on the table. He stood up when he saw me and greeted me with a firm handshake, although I could notice a certain discomfort in his eyes. How have you been, Marcos? I asked as I sat down. Fine, Mr. Hector, fine. Well, more or less, he replied, shaking his head from side to side. What happened? Why did you want to see me? Marcos looked around, as if making sure no one was listening, and then leaned forward, speaking in a low voice. Things are bad at the company, Mr. Hector, very bad. What do you mean? I said, although deep down I already sensed where this was going. Since you left, the inventory is a disaster. The supervisor's nephew doesn't even know how to count. He arrived thinking he could handle everything without help, and, well, you know how he is. Arrogant, lazy, he doesn't even show up every day. At first people try to cover for him, but now no one can. I remained silent, listening. Although I didn't show it, I felt a twinge of satisfaction, not because I wanted them to do badly, but because it was proof that I wasn't as replaceable as they thought. And what's happening now? I asked. Does Mr. Ramirez already know everything? He got tired of the problems with the suppliers, the customer complaints, and the money that is being lost. They started a deeper audit, and that's where they realized that things were missing. Lost inventory, products that never arrived but were registered as delivered. Marcos paused to take a sip of his coffee. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him. And the nephew? I finally asked. Marcos smiled bitterly. The guy is up to his neck, Mr. Hector. It turns out there is evidence that he was manipulating the records. It seems that someone was helping him too, but they still don't know who. Mr. Ramirez is furious, and the supervisor is just as complicated because, of course, it's her nephew. They put him there and defended him, but now that everything is falling apart, they have no way to justify it. I felt something inside me loosen. For a moment, I imagined the supervisor's face when Mr. Ramirez confronted her. I imagined the nephew, the same guy who came in thinking the job was a joke, trying to explain why the inventory was a mess. But that small satisfaction didn't last long. And what do I have to do with all this, Marcos? I asked in a more serious tone. Well, that's the problem, he replied, looking down. Some believe that all this started before you left. They don't say it openly, but that's why they called you that time. They're looking for someone to blame. And you know how people are. It's easier to point the finger at the one who's no longer there than to accept that they were wrong. I felt a hollowness in my stomach. Even though everything was pointing to the nephew and the supervisor, there was still a chance they would want to blame me. The perfect scapegoat. I was no longer there. I had no way to defend myself, and, besides, who would believe a 50-year-old man who now did temporary jobs? And what's going to happen to them? I asked. Marcos shrugged. I don't know. Mr. Ramirez wants to cut heads, that's for sure. The nephew's thing is going to explode sooner or later, but the supervisor, she still has influence. Some say she's going to try to fix all this before the situation gets out of control. We were silent for a few seconds. I looked out the cafe window, watching people hurrying down the street, as if the world hadn't stopped for them. Look, Mr. Hector, I wanted to tell you because, I don't know, I think it's only fair that you know. You don't deserve to be involved in this. All of us who worked with you know that you were the only one who did things right. Thank you, Marcos, I said, though the word felt small. We said goodbye shortly after. As I walked back home, I couldn't help but think about everything I had heard. I imagined the supervisor trying to cover up the mess, her nephew making up excuses, while Mr. Ramirez demanded answers. For a moment, I almost wished they would ask me to come back to fix everything. Because, even though they fired me, even though they humiliated me and replaced me without thinking, a part of me still feels responsible, as if that inventory was still my job, my burden. But no, I don't want to go back. I don't belong there anymore, and they don't deserve for me to solve the mess they created themselves. All I hope now is that they don't have the nerve to point the finger at me when the news tightens, because if I know anything, it's that when all this explodes, someone is going to pay the piper, and I'm not going to be that someone. Final update. A few weeks passed after the conversation with Marcos, and although I tried to move on with my life, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that was happening at the company. I imagined the audits, the complaints, the long faces in the meetings. I knew that place well. I knew how it worked and how it fell apart when someone incompetent took the reins. And now that the supervisor and her nephew were in the crosshairs, I couldn't help but feel a certain morbid curiosity. One Monday morning, while helping a neighbor paint a fence, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. Hector, it's Ramirez. The owner, again. I felt a tingle in my chest. It was strange that he called me twice in such a short time. I try not to get excited, but I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they were calling me to come back. Mr. Ramirez, I answered, wiping my hands with a rag. How are you? Fine, fine. Listen, Hector, I wanted to call you personally to tell you what happened. I kept quiet, waiting. We finally finished the audit. It was a disaster. They found enough evidence to fire the supervisor's nephew. It turns out the boy was manipulating records, diverting products, and, probably, selling them on the side. A total stupidity. He had no idea what he was doing, and, to top it off, he was dishonest. I felt a strange relief upon hearing it, as if a part of me needed that confirmation to close a chapter. And the supervisor? I asked curiously. She's gone too, Mr. Ramirez replied. I asked for her resignation. She was trying to cover for her nephew, and, although we didn't find direct evidence that she was involved, it was clear that she didn't do her job. Trust was lost, and I had no other choice. There it was, justice at last. The nephew fired, the supervisor out of the company. What they thought was a simple change of personnel had ended in chaos that cost them dearly. I'm not going to lie, for a moment I felt vindicated. I thought of those 30 years where I gave everything for that company, where I took care of every inventory and every process as if they were my own. And now that the disaster was solved, who did they call to tell? Me. And what's going to happen now? I asked, trying to sound casual. Mr. Ramirez paused. I felt that something else was coming, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of hope in my chest. Well, Hector, that's why I wanted to talk to you. I want to thank you. Thanks to you and the conversation we had, I was able to understand what was happening. You were key for us to open our eyes and make the right decisions. You don't have to thank me, Mr. Ramirez, I said, though my heart was beating fast. And look, I'm not going to lie, we miss your work. Nobody took care of that area like you did. That's when I felt it, that little spark of hope. Was he asking me to come back? For a moment, I imagined myself returning to my desk, putting on my work uniform, greeting my colleagues, resuming what I had lost. Maybe this time, even, with a better position or with some recognition. Mr. Ramirez, I'm willing to come back if necessary, I said almost without thinking, like someone throwing a last lifeline. There was silence on the other side, a silence that tasted bitter to me. Hector, he finally said in a different tone, I know you're the best at what you do, but I can't rehire you. My world fell apart at that moment. I remained silent, with the phone glued to my ear, waiting for him to say something else. Why not? I managed to ask after a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Look, things aren't like they used to be. The company isn't going through its best moment, and bringing back someone with your experience and seniority, well, it would be an expense that we simply can't afford. An expense. That's what he called me. After 30 years of work, effort, and sacrifice, I was just that, an expense. Besides, don't be offended, Hector, but at your age things are more complicated. We need young people who can adapt faster and who charge less. It's the reality of things. I didn't know what to answer. I stared at the half-painted fence, the paint can next to my feet, and felt something inside me break. I understand, Mr. Ramirez, was all I could say. Thank you for understanding, Hector. Really, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call me. He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, like an idiot. If you ever need anything? What was I supposed to need from him now? I had nothing left. I had given 3 decades of my life to that company. I had endured humiliations. I had seen how they replaced me with a useless nephew. And now that it all ended as I knew it would, they didn't even offer me the chance to come back. Too old. Too expensive. That phrase has been going around in my head ever since. It's funny how, when they need you, you're indispensable, but when you're no longer useful, you become a burden. That night, I told my wife everything. She didn't say anything. She just hugged me. They don't deserve you, Hector, she said finally. But that doesn't mean you're not worth anything. I don't know if she's right. All I know is that, after so many years, I'm now a 50-year-old man who does temporary jobs and whom no one wants to hire because he's too expensive. There's no happy ending to this story. There's no justice for those of us who gave everything and were left with nothing.